Chapter 30. Did Ryudo understand what Advisor Fujiki said before? Of course, he understood. Whether it was the concern of Kazuma Karima's father or Advisor Fujiki, Ryudo had received it. But unfortunately, he couldn't stay away from the Rulon group like the two elders wanted him to and try to live an ordinary life. The reason was very simple. Because Tenmu Ayam would never let him go, and there was still a Kanzaki-colored glaze to save. Ryudo was also quite familiar with Ayam's personality. If she found out that the person she ordered to kill was still alive and kicking, she definitely wouldn't let him go. In other words, if Ryudo left the protection of the Rulon group, he would only die faster. Furthermore, without the influence of this organization, Ryudo wouldn't be able to confront the Kanzaki family, and it would be even more impossible for him to rescue Ruri within 2 years. Therefore, no matter from any perspective, Ryudo needed the Rulon group. The most important thing was that he needed a Rulon group in a healthy state, not a crippled organization that was torn apart by civil war. According to Fujimoto's inference just now, the old dog Sakata also knew that the matter had been exposed, so he would definitely counterattack in a desperate situation. Because the Sakata group had the support of the Tenmu group, whether it was manpower or equipment, they were all top-notch. If a full-scale war really started, even if the Rulon group won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. But fortunately, you're here. It's much easier now. However, at this moment, Ryudo grabbed Yamamoto's hair and dragged him out like a dead dog. As if he thought he was going to be dragged out and killed, Yamamoto twisted his body frantically and struggled. Don't be noisy. What you did was not enough to kill you 10 times. But congratulations, you now have new value. Oh? Under Yamamoto's baffled gaze, Ryudo dragged him to a wall not far away. The headquarters of the Rulon group was Ryudo's home, so he was very familiar with everything here. Especially since this young master had been a playboy since he was young, he often sneaked out to play. It was easy for him to sneak out without anyone noticing. Therefore, after arranging for the male puppet to be his substitute, Ryudo carried Yamamoto and left the headquarters of Ryu Group and ran towards the street not far away. As for the 3 Southeast Asian assassins, they were meant to be used as evidence. Now that Sakata had rebelled, there was no need for evidence. He could just get Kawaki, Nan to dig a hole and bury him. In any case, the 3 of them had taken Ryudo's first blood, so their deaths were not to be regretted. At the same time, while Ryudo was quietly carrying out his plan behind the back of the Rulon group, a large house on the other side of the street was already full of people. People who often hang out in the Kamishito area must have seen these faces often. Some of them wore suits, some wore shirts, and some wore vests, but all of them had a fierce look on their faces. Wolf's Den. There was no doubt that a group of hungry wolves gathered here at this time, and this big house naturally became a wolf's den. Although it was not complete, these more than 100 members of the Sakata group were the elite forces under Sakata Minoru. However, after the boss gathered everyone, he held a plaque in his hand that shocked everyone. Because on the huge wooden plaque, the words Sakata Group Headquarters were neatly written. As everyone knew, the Sakata Group was a division of the Rulon Group and belonged to this second-level organization. Of course, it could not hang the headquarters sign used by the top level, unless Sakata Minoru planned to take people out to establish his own gang and leave the Rulon Group. This knowledge was well known to those who had been in the underworld for a long time. So basically, everyone who could come here already knew the purpose of the boss when they saw the plaque. No way, Sakata boss is really planning to leave the Rulon Group and start his own gang. When everyone realized this, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became very heavy. No one dared to breathe loudly for fear of igniting this strange atmosphere. After all, in the world of Extreme Dipper, establishing another gang was not a simple matter, and it could lead to serious bloody disputes at any moment. Everyone, I believe that when you see this plaque, you already understand. After a while, Sakata Minoru straightened his back and said with a gentle smile on his face. He turned his head and looked at the wooden plaque, smiled and said, "From now on, the Sakata group will leave the Rulon group and establish our own gang in Kamishito." Sure enough, although everyone had guessed this, when they heard Sakata boss say it openly, many people's faces suddenly changed. At this moment, I, Sakata Minoru, have nothing to do with the Rulon group, and there may even be a conflict. But Sakata didn't seem to care about the atmosphere below at all and continued to say, "But I won't force you. If anyone wants to leave, walk out of this door now, and we'll be strangers in the future." What? If you don't want to follow, you can leave now. In an instant, someone looked at the open door behind them. There was no doubt that a considerable number of members were unwilling to leave the Rulon group. After all, if they followed Sakata boss, it was foreseeable that they would inevitably encounter a series of bloody battles, and the probability of survival was extremely low. So a young man wanted to stand up and raise his hand, but he was stopped by a senior next to him. "Brother Matsuhara? Don't leave at this time if you don't want to die." Under the young man's puzzled gaze, the old man next to him who knew Sakata's character shook his head. "I'm sorry. I want to leave." In the next second, there was finally another younger member who couldn't hold it in anymore. He raised his hand and bowed to Sakata boss, who was standing above him, and then quickly walked towards the door. When this first precedent appeared, everyone's eyes were focused on him until this young team member left the door and his figure disappeared. What? Didn't nothing happen? Seeing the young member leave, the young man who wanted to raise his hand was relieved. But before he could completely exhale, a truck suddenly rushed out not far from the door. With the speed of a clap of thunder, it slammed into the other side. Accompanied by a scream and the sound of something being smashed, the faces of the people in the room who wanted to leave suddenly turned pale. "Is there anyone else who wants to leave? If you want to do it as soon as possible." Under Sakata's gentle gaze, no one else chose to leave. This also meant that a new organization, the Sakata Group, was formed, and a large-scale war with the Rulon Group could begin at any time. Chapter 31. In the evening of the same day, a storm was brewing in the Kamadachi area, and the traffic on the street was much less than usual. Women who worked in nightclubs gathered in groups of 3 to 5, nervously and excitedly chatting about the latest news they just heard from their friends. Although the sound in by Chingji's pinball shop was still as noisy as before, the players who lingered in the shop would occasionally look out of the window, fearing that some uninvited guest would appear. Some of the more timid bars even directly closed their doors to avoid becoming a battlefield in the upcoming conflict. Indeed, the people who often came to the Kamadachi area were very sensitive, and almost all of them had smelled the scent of blood that was about to sweep over. But this was also very normal. After all, the huge organization that controlled the entire street, the Rulon Group, had a split, and it was impossible for such a big matter not to be leaked. Now many people already knew that Sakata was planning to lead his men to prepare for independence, and Fujimoto's side would not give up. And as both sides continued to gather their forces, the tension of the imminent battle also stimulated everyone's nerves. Could they stop the outbreak of this battle? It was probably difficult. After all, Sakata had already done everything, and there was no turning back. Unless Sakata Minoru, who was preparing to establish his own faction, suddenly died before the battle began. In that case, they could naturally turn big things into small things, and small things into nothing. But Sakata also knew that many people were watching him, so the protection around him was also very tight. Was there really someone who could kill that old bastard Sakata under the protection of over 100 elite Apex experts? The answer was yes. So that's how it is. I understand the whole story. Not long after, when the sky was dark, an old butler in a suit stood in the courtyard of a residential building hundreds of meters away from the Sakata mansion and nodded slightly. Although he wasn't young anymore, it wasn't impossible for him to take the head of an enemy in the middle of an army of thousands of soldiers and horses. It just so happened that he owed Ryudo a request, so he called the old butler of Kanzai over. There may be many people in the world who could stop everything at this juncture, but Ryudo could only call this one person to help. "Butler Bunnyball, when can we do it? Can you deal with it tonight?" Similarly, in the backyard of the first floor of the residential building, Ryudo looked at the trustworthy figure and couldn't help but feel relieved. After all, the person beside Ryudo was the strongest helper in the game, Cathouse Bunnyball. With this guy's help, Sakata Minoru would be nothing more than a fat pig waiting to be slaughtered. However, Rabbit Ball pondered for a moment before replying seriously, "I don't think we can do it tonight. We lack enough information and the other party has too many guards around them. It's hard to get close. Ryudo's request was to only kill Sakata Minoru and spare the rest if possible. At this moment, Sakata Minoru was under the protection of many of his subordinates, and it would be difficult to deal with him alone. According to Bunnyball's usual style, he would follow the target and gather information for a period of time. After finding out the target's pattern of movement, he would look for a time when the guards were the weakest. Of course, this was also the standard practice of assassins throughout history. Those who chopped their way in with an axe were clearly not assassins. However, Bunnyball's usual practice was slightly different from Ryudo's request. After all, if there were no accidents, the Sakatagumi would start a war with the Rulon group tonight. If the problem wasn't solved in the next few hours, there would be a large number of casualties. Butler Bunnyball, I actually have a plan. You can take a look at it and see if it's feasible. At this time, Ryudo pointed at the man he threw on the ground not far away, Yamamoto. There was no doubt that Yamamoto was a person who deserved to die. Not only did he betray the Rulon group, but he also wanted to kill his own young master, Ryuto. No matter which crime it was enough for this guy to die 8 to 10 times. Although killing this guy would be satisfying for a while, the reality of the problem would not change. Therefore, instead of killing Yamamoto, Ryudo planned to use him to carry out a plan called Trojan Horse. The core element of this plan was to get Yamamoto to bring Ryudo and Rabamaru into the Sakata mansion under the guise of escaping on his own. Then, he would take the opportunity to approach Sakata and deliver a fatal blow. Although Sakata had many subordinates, there were only a few diehards, and most of them were just neutral. As long as that guy died, Ryudo, as the next leader of the Rulon group, would be able to take over the group of ownerless soldiers. Just like this, the war would end, and the Sakata group would disappear on the spot. Everything would be fine. After listening to Ryudo's plan, Bunnyball nodded and said in an admiring tone, I see. Going into the tiger's den, young Master Ryudo, you are really brave. Needless to say, for a 16-year-old boy, Ryudo was really brave, as if he didn't know how to write the word death. But in fact, he did know how to write this word, and he had personally written it 3 times. Rip. After describing the plan, Ryudo came in front of Yamamoto and tore off the tape on his mouth. How about it? Yamamoto? Did you hear it clearly? Do you want to do this job or not? If you can promise to let me go after it's over. Yamamoto was also an experienced person, so he naturally knew that he couldn't say no, otherwise, he would die on the spot. What he really cared about was his own fate after it was over. Don't worry. Ryuto nodded and said to him seriously, I swear on the reputation of the Rulon group leader, Kiryu Kazuma, that as long as you leave Kamadachi after it's over, our Rulon group will never harm you. For Yamamoto, this was already a very generous condition, so he naturally had no reason to refuse. Even for those extreme Taoists who were known for their loyalty, their awareness was usually just a little bit bigger than their noses. So not long after, 3 familiar figures appeared at the door of the Sakata mansion that was heavily guarded. Yamamoto? How did you come back? Isn't this Ryudo Kiryu? Looking down from the second-floor balcony of the mansion, Sakata thought he was mistaken when he saw the familiar faces of Yamamoto and Ryuto. When he learned that Yamamoto was captured and brought to the Rulon Group headquarters, he thought that Yamamoto was dead, but in fact, he was not. Not only did this guy come back, but he also brought such a valuable gift. The only blood relative of the Rulon Group leader, Ryudo Kiryu. Chapter 32. The Sakata Mansion was another mansion that Sakata secretly purchased on the street of the Rulon Group headquarters. The mansion's courtyard was large, but it was already filled with people. Dozens of people in various outfits, with fierce eyes, tattoos on their backs, and weapons in their hands, gathered in a group. They surrounded Ryuto, Yamamoto, and an inconspicuous man in black. The owner of the mansion, Sakata Minoru, stood on the second-floor balcony and looked down at the scene below. Even in this situation, there were still 2 bald men standing in front of Sakata. Their burly bodies almost broke through the restraints of their suits. The scar on their faces showed that they had experienced something unusual. Their eagle-like eyes and murderous posture were enough to make thieves wet their pants. These two guys are real professionals. I can't believe Sakata has such masters under his command. When he saw the two bald men, the inconspicuous man in black standing behind Long Do raised his eyebrows slightly. While being surrounded, Yamamoto forced a smile and said to his boss, "Yes, it's him, Ryudo Kiryu, the good son of the leader." At this time, Ryu's mouth and hands were wrapped in bandages. He was held in Yamamoto's hand like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. On the second-floor balcony, Sakata revealed a strange smile and asked, "Yamamoto, how did you escape from the headquarters?" "Well, this brat wanted to retaliate against me, so I caught him and phew, do it, kill them." Before Yamamoto finished, Sakata yawned and ordered his men without hesitation. The order came so suddenly that Yamamoto's expression changed drastically. Seeing Sakata's order, Yamamoto quickly shouted at the top of his lungs, "Wait, Boss Sakata, I still have something to say." "You still have something to say? Don't make a fool of yourself. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old? After glancing at Yamamoto, Sakata shook his head with a regretful expression. To be honest, for Sakata, who had been in the underworld for decades, he had seen countless schemes and tricks, and he was also an expert at playing tricks. So when he saw Yamamoto come back alive from the Rulon Group headquarters, he already understood what was going on. Basically, they let Yamamoto come in as a spy, and then they worked with him from the inside. Wasn't this strategy at the level of a 3-year-old? Perhaps there was something wrong with his IQ. Although it was admirable for the Ryukyu group to have the guts to join forces with Tongsheng Ryujin, it wouldn't work on Sakata. He wouldn't believe it at all. This. Seeing that Boss Sakata's face was getting worse and worse, Yamamoto could not help but gasp for breath. After a few seconds, he slowly raised his head and said, "Boss Sakata, you are right. I did come here to pretend to surrender." When he heard this, Ryudo next to him began to struggle violently. "Shut up." Yamamoto punched Ryudo in the abdomen and knocked him to the ground. Looking at the sudden internal struggle below, Sakata leisurely lit a cigarette and asked in an interested tone, "And then? They said if I cooperated, they would let me go. They asked me to bring this kid in and pretend to surrender, but in fact, I would cooperate with them to assassinate you, Sakata-sama." "Oh, assassinate me? So that's what they were planning." Hearing this, Sakata's expression remained unchanged. He pointed to the young man in black next to Yamamoto and asked, "Who is this?" "This is the assassin who came to kill you. As long as he enters the room, he will." Before Yamaguchi could finish his sentence, the man in black behind him had already rushed toward him without a word. He also had a sharp dagger in his hand. However, Yamamoto was no pushover. With a beautiful grab, he held down the dagger that was stabbing at him. Then, he turned around and stabbed the dagger into the black-clothed assassin's abdomen. In front of dozens of people, the assassin who was sent to assassinate Sakata fell to the ground, blood flowing everywhere. Clap, 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 clap. At this moment, Sakata on the second-floor balcony clapped his hands in satisfaction and smiled. "Well done. Congratulations, Yamamoto. You have once again gained my initial trust." "Phew." Yamamoto took a deep breath and said respectfully, "Because I know that following them will have a better future." "Smart. Bring that brat Long Do in. Since the eldest young master is here, we have to properly greet him." After leaving behind a burst of malicious laughter, Sakata walked into the second-floor hall with 2 of his men and waited for the opening of a new game. Woo! When Yamamoto pulled him into the mansion, Ryudo was still struggling, and the other extreme dios around him looked at the former young master with regret. They were all members of the former Rulon group and naturally knew Ryudo Kiryu. From the beginning, most of the team members joined because they admired the extreme ninja Tongsheng Ikiyama. They loved young master Ryudo more or less because of him. But now that the Rulon group and the Sakata Gumi had completely turned against each other, Ryudo would be doomed after being caught in the mansion. Even Sakata, that smiling tiger, might use very cruel means to torture and kill this young master after capturing him. When they thought of this, many people couldn't help but turn their heads, but there was nothing they could do. They could only carry the body lying on the ground and throw it to the warehouse. When the sky darkened a little, they loaded it into a truck and transported it to the mountains to bury it. That was all. 2 Sakata Gumi members were sent to perform this task. They carried the body to the warehouse while complaining about why they always had to do this kind of chores. But after entering the warehouse in the corner of the mansion, the complaints quickly disappeared. Soon after, a young man wearing the clothes of one of the young members slowly walked out of the warehouse. He looked at the structure of the mansion next to him, then stepped on the air conditioner next to him and jumped directly to the window on the second floor. From the time they entered the house, 3 minutes and 27 seconds had passed. Please don't die, young Master Ryuto. When he pried open the window from the outside and stepped into the mansion, he put on makeup to make himself look more like a young man's cat house. He wiped the ketchup off his body and quickly ran into the inner hall. Chapter 33. When he was taken into the hall, Ryuto secretly revealed a happy smile, but the smile was covered by tape. As the specially modified steel door that was difficult to break open from the outside slowly closed, Ryuto appeared in front of a magnificent hall. The floor of the hall was as smooth as a mirror, and there were magnificent hanging lights above. There were also many expensive paintings and animal head specimens on the walls. In short, this was a mansion belonging to the nouveau riche. Although the owner of the mansion was rich, he didn't know how to use it properly and could only make a clumsy imitation. Young Master Ryuto, this is all I can help you with. You can do the rest yourself. Before handing Ryuto over to a few of Sakata's subordinates, Yamamoto whispered in Ryuto's ear. Indeed, Yamamoto was taken to another room and didn't follow him to the second floor. It was clear that Sakata was still somewhat guarded against him. The plan was successful up to this point. Yamamoto's jumping left and right to change sides and Rabamara's failing to fight and getting killed were all part of the plan. After all, Sakata was an old fox. If he didn't do this, it would be quite difficult to sneak in. The courtyard was full of people, but no matter what, Ryuto came in, and Rabamara would soon sneak in. So when the 2 black-clothed Jidao escorted him to the second floor, Ryuto's mood was actually quite good. But he didn't notice that the young man on his left secretly put his left hand into his pocket as he went upstairs. Sorry. To repay the favor, I can only do this. The 3 of them walked to a corner on the second floor. When they saw Sakata's study 100 meters away, a sudden change occurred. The young man on the left with a scar on his face, who looked quite fierce, raised a stun baton without hesitation and slammed it to the right. Poof! Before the black-clothed man on the right who was escorting Ryuto could react, he was already knocked down by the scar-faced man without even making a sound. What's going on? Internal strife? Ryuto was a little confused when he saw the 2 people who were escorting him suddenly start fighting. Young Master Ryuto, let's go quickly. Jump out of the window over there and climb over the wall to reach the street. You'll be safe then. The knife-scarred man who suddenly released his colleague spoke as quickly as he could as he removed the tape on Ryuto's hand. Ah, so that's how it is. Are they on my side? Hearing this, Ryuto finally understood what the scar-faced man was trying to do. Could it be that this guy was in Cao Cao's camp, but his heart was elsewhere? No, strictly speaking, it was not that he was in the Cao camp, but his heart was in the Han camp. It was just that the eldest brother suddenly raised the banner and started the Yellow Turban uprising, which inexplicably involved him. When the tape on Ryuto's mouth was torn off, he immediately said, "Bro, you'll die if you do this." If Ryuto left like this, whether he could leave was another matter, but the knife-scarred man would definitely not live to see tomorrow. Extreme Dao used the most terrifying methods on traitors, especially Sakata, who was a great traitor. It doesn't matter. Even if I die, I won't regret it. Why? Aren't you afraid of death? I've already chosen the wrong path and become a rotten person, but I don't want to make the same mistake again and become trash that is worse than a rotten person. At this point, a trace of determination flashed in the knife-scarred man's eyes. It had to be said that this kid's style and loyalty were admirable, but the problem was that it seemed to be used at the wrong time. So Ryuto immediately said, "Wait, I'm not leaving. Just take me in to find Sakata." "Young Master Ryuto, if you go in, you'll be killed," Someone will be killed, but the person who will be killed won't be me. Could it be? Young Master Ryudo is. Suddenly, the knife-scarred man seemed to understand something. After all, he was also in the underworld, so he could understand in 1 or 2 sentences. At the same time, he seemed to see the back of the heavy mountain that blocked in front of him 5 years ago. It was a rainy night. The knife-scarred man had a falling out with his brothers in the firm and was chased all the way to Kamishimachi. I'm dead. I'm dead. When he was surrounded by more than a dozen people, the knife-scarred man could not help but smile bitterly. However, the man who appeared from the dark street not far away saved him. Who are you? How dare you meddle in our business? Get lost. Kamishimachi is not a place you should set foot in. The man used a faint tone to speak imposing words, and his words were full of unquestionable meaning. More than a dozen strong men could not say a word in front of him and could only leave in embarrassment. This was the opportunity for the knife-scarred man to join the Rulon group because he admired the group leader so much. At that time, the group leader of the Rulon group exuded a strong aura, as if he did not think that he would die at all. At this time, the son of the dragon, young Master Ryudo, exuded an aura very similar to that of Kiryu Ikiyama, whom the knife-scarred man encountered at that time. Sure enough, like father, like son, it seems that he was not caught, but he planned to take the initiative to kill Sakata. After understanding this, the knife-scarred man immediately said, I'm Narukayo Tani. I'm willing to die for you. You really want to help? You may die. The path of a hero is death without life. Very good. It seems that this man is trustworthy. After sensing Otani's determination to face death with equanimity, Long Do reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Time passed by minute, and more than a minute had passed since Ryudo entered the mansion. More than a minute, walking from the first floor to the second floor and opening the door of the study should be enough. What's going on? Why haven't they come in yet? At the same time, Sakata, who had been waiting with a dumbbell in the spacious study for a long time, felt that something was wrong. So he said to the bodyguard number 1 beside him, Go outside and see what Ryudo is doing. Yes, I'm going. Boom. Before the bald bodyguard number 1 walked out, the door of the study was knocked open with a muffled noise. What? Sakata and the 2 bodyguards immediately looked over and happened to see the scene of Ryudo rolling and getting up from the ground. And the one who rushed in after him was Narukayo Tani. Otani? What the hell are you doing? Sakata immediately frowned and asked when he saw this strange scene. Sorry, Sakata boss. This kid just wanted to run and knocked out Yoshino. Yoshino was the black-clothed man who had just escorted Ryudo to the second floor with Otani. From Sakata's point of view, he could just see Yoshino's figure on the ground. Brat, you dare to resist? I'll knock out your teeth one by one. After taking a look at Ryudo, Sakata walked over with a special long dumbbell that weighed 15 kilograms. Chapter 34. There were many weapons that Japanese extreme Dao liked to use. Daggers, clubs, pistols, katanas, taser, and so on. But Sakata was different. His favorite weapon was dumbbells, and they were specially made long dumbbells. From the side, the dumbbells in his hands were no different from small dumbbells. The half-meter-long handle was thin and long, and the round ends on both sides were heavy and large. This thing that weighed 15 kilograms was Sakata's little toy, and it was also his favorite baton to hit people's heads with. Among the older generation of extreme Dao, Sakata was not particularly good at fighting, but he was particularly brutal. When he reached middle age, he liked to work out, and then he fell in love with the feeling of hitting people with fitness equipment. For example, the especially large dumbbells in Sakata's hands. When hit, the brain matter would fly a few meters away. Be careful, young Master Ryudo. Sakata has a strange strength. If this thing hits someone, they will die. Seeing Sakata pick up the dumbbells and walk toward Ryuto, although Otani retreated to the side, he still watched nervously. Although he had entered the study, he could not act rashly. After all, the 2 bodyguards behind him were still watching his every move. If Otani made a move, he would probably die on the spot. Damn it, he still doesn't treat people as people, but as if he was looking at his prey. After secretly glancing at the 2 unknown bodyguards, Otani could not help but tremble slightly. Not everyone in the Sakata group really obeyed Sakata, but no one dared to resist. Other than Sakata's huge power, the biggest reason was the existence of the two bald bodyguards. These two guys, how should he put it, were monsters in the extreme Tao. Judging from the information that Sakata boss accidentally revealed when he was drunk, the two of them came from the Middle East battlefield and were mercenaries who fought on the battlefield since young. This also caused the strength of the two bodyguards to be on a completely different level compared to ordinary extreme Tao. Even if they were unarmed, a dozen or 20 extreme Tao would not be their match. Russell, Russell, Russell. Young Master Ryudo, I didn't expect you to be so daring. You actually dared to follow Yamamoto and barge then. When Sakata came to Ryudo's side, he raised the dumbbells in his hands as he spoke, and when he said the last two words, he suddenly swung the dumbbells down. The 15 kilograms of iron was swung vigorously, and this time, it was aimed at Ryudo's leg. He intended to cripple his leg. Although Sakata was fast, Ryudo's reaction was not slow either. He quickly rolled on the ground and rolled to the side in an unsightly posture to avoid Sakata's heavy blow. But before Long Do could stabilize himself, a gust of strong wind suddenly blew from behind him. Oomph! Long Do hurriedly raised his right hand to block, and then half of his body was kicked into the air. The one who attacked from behind was naturally one of Sakata's two bodyguards. The slightly shorter bodyguard dodged quickly like a ghost, and his right leg swept towards Ryudo's neck like a whip. The speed of the kick was completely at the level of a professional grandmaster of combat, and the position of the kick was also quite lethal. What a heavy kick, but he could still withstand it. The moment he was kicked, Ryudo felt like he was hit by a motorcycle, but his tough and powerful arms were only slightly red and swollen, not completely broken. After all, in terms of physical condition, Ryudo's physical attributes were also at the professional level. In fact, there was not much difference between him and the two mercenaries, although the difference in actual combat experience and combat skills was like heaven and earth. You actually dared to dodge, how naughty. Seeing Ryudo slowly stand up from the ground, Sakata, who walked over with the dumbbells, revealed a terrifying smile. The two of you, hold this little demon in place so that I don't miss again. I have to slowly break the 200. How many bones in his body? Hearing Sakata's hesitation about the number of bones, Ryudo did not hesitate to mock. It's 206, idiot. Is that so? It doesn't matter. After all, your bones will become 512 because they're all cracked. As Sakata pointed, the two mercenaries quickly came behind Ryuto, one on the left and one on the right, and pressed down on his shoulders. With Long Do's current strength, he wouldn't be able to defeat the two of them in a one-on-one battle, let alone if the two of them were to gang up on him. When Ryuto was firmly pinned down, Sakata also shook his arm and raised the dumbbells, ready to break the wrist. Which bone do you want to start with? Finger bones are healed. They say that the 10 fingers are connected to the heart. If I crush your finger bones one by one, I guarantee that you'll be in so much pain that you'll want to kill yourself on the spot. Looking at Ryudo's slender fingers, Sakata showed an excited expression. Here's the chance. Do it. But the moment Sakata raised the dumbbells, Otani, who had been watching from a distance, suddenly reached out and took out a black pistol from his clothes. This black pistol was the final weapon that Ryudo gave him before entering the door. If Sakata and the two bodyguards focus their attention on me, just shoot. Don't hesitate. As a member of Extreme Path, Otani was not a novice who had never fired a gun before. He quickly raised the pistol and pointed it at Sakata's head, then quickly pulled the trigger. Huh. Bang. But the moment Otani pulled the trigger, a gunshot sounded in advance. The flying bullet cut through the air and directly pierced a bloody hole in Otani's right palm, and the pistol in his hand naturally fell to the ground from the huge impact. How is this possible? There's actually a third bodyguard? Before Otani turned his head, a figure holding a gun appeared in the mural next to him. This scene suddenly scared Otani, and Ryudo, who was not far away, couldn't help but grit his teeth. Sorry, Otani, I didn't say that I only have two bodyguards. Although Sakata didn't even turn his head, he seemed to have seen everything that happened behind him. In fact, from the beginning, Sakata knew that Otani was not reliable, who asked the shape of the pistol in his clothes to be so obvious. If you want to hide a gun next time, it's best to hide it at the waist of your pants and cover it with your clothes, but you won't have a next time. Having said that, Sakata made a gesture behind him without turning his head, and suddenly raised the dumbbells and smashed them at Ryudo's arm. Is it over? At this moment, Otani felt the murderous intent of the small bodyguard who had been hiding in the dark next to him. He would immediately pull the trigger and kill Narukai Otani, just like crushing an ant. In desperation, Otani could only sigh and prepare to turn around and make a final struggle, whoosh. However, at the last moment when Otani was about to turn around, accompanied by a slight sound, a slender long needle flew out of nowhere and pierced the small bodyguard's inner wrist. Chapter 35. The momentum of this long needle was truly untraceable. It wasn't until the short bodyguard pulled the trigger and realized that he couldn't exert any force with his fingers that he realized he had been hit. My fingers can't move? In an instant, the short bodyguard lowered his head and looked at his right wrist. He looked at the long needle inserted into the acupoint. However, how could Otani, who was not far away, let go of this heaven-sent opportunity? He let out a tiger-like howl, quickly pounced over, and punched the short bodyguard in the chin. This punch could be said to be quite standard, and the position of the punch was completely correct. With a single punch, the unlucky bodyguard felt as if the world had turned upside down. His entire body fell limply to the ground. This was a hidden weapon. When he noticed the strange movement over there, one of the bodyguards holding down Ryudo immediately let go of him, but kicked out the Sakata boss who had raised the dumbbell in front of him. What? Sakata was prepared to smash Ryudo's bones with his hammer, but he did not expect to be kicked by his own bodyguard. However, the moment he was kicked out, he understood the reason. That was because a long needle was flying towards Sakata's throat. After losing its target, it stuck into the wall not far away. The flying needle pierced into the wall. What kind of terrifying strength was this? Who were they? Who's outside? For a moment, everyone's eyes unconsciously looked towards the corridor outside the broken door. The one standing there was a very young man in black clothes. Although this black-clothed man was young, in the eyes of the two mercenary bodyguards who had experienced life and death situations, he was as terrifying as a demon from hell. Even the other mercenary who was fighting the dragon couldn't help but tense up when he saw this uninvited guest who suddenly barged into the battle. This guy is not simple. He must have experienced countless battles. But before he could finish his thoughts, a fist landed on his abdomen. The huge force passed through his thick muscles and acted on his internal organs, causing the mercenary to squat down. Do you think I'm dead? It's fine if you just look over there without looking at me. It was Ryudo Kiryu who seized this opportunity to make a move. He did not look at the person in the corridor. After all, he already knew who that person was. After fiercely punching the mercenary beside him, Ryudo quickly broke free from the hand that was pressed down. He turned his head and grabbed the mercenary's head and pressed it down. At the same time, Long Do's right knee also quickly went up. He was actually planning to give this old man a head-pressing knee strike. If this hit were to land, not to mention his face, even his head would be smashed into smithereens. However, this mercenary was still a professional. At the last moment, he reached out his hand to block his face and was only hit with dizziness. You really came at the right time. Are you doing this on purpose? After casually kicking the mercenary away, Ryudo quickly retreated to Otani's side and picked up the gun dropped by the short bodyguard on the ground. I didn't do it on purpose. It's just that the guys outside were a little slow and didn't immediately carry me into the warehouse. The person who suddenly entered the battlefield was naturally Ryudo's biggest reliance, Guardian Ninja Tomoya Bunkamaru. After he pretended to be dead and sneaked into the mansion, he quickly knocked out the scattered enemies on the first floor and used a heavy object to block the door from the inside. If one walked to the window, it was not difficult to hear some noise coming from outside. After all, there were several gunshots from the study on the second floor. It was impossible for the nearly 100 Sakata Gumi members to not notice. Unfortunately, Sakata deliberately designed his door to be a steel door for fear of being attacked. Even a car might not be able to break it open. So when Bunkomaru blocked the door from the inside and came to the study, everything was over. Ryuto had a gun in his hand, and Bunkomaru had a needle in his hand. With just Sakata and his 2 mercenary bodyguards, there was no way they could survive in this situation. In fact, only 3 minutes later, Sakata fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The 2 mercenaries who were used as amulets collapsed on the ground, and a black muzzle was pointed at Sakata's head. It's over. It's all over. Sakata would never have dreamed that his idea of dragging Ryudo in to torture him to death would end up being a death sentence. Well done. I have to say, I underestimated you. When Sakata knew he was about to die, he took out a pipe from his pocket and took a deep puff. The pipe was not lit, so naturally, no smoke came out. But Sakata didn't seem to care. Ryudo pointed the gun at Sakata's head. His eyes were like torches and asked sternly, "Before I kill you, I want to ask a question. Why did I betray the Rulon group? ? Yes, the leader treated you well. Why did you betray him? Probably because the leader is too good. What? Ryudo looked surprised, as if he didn't expect such a strange answer. In our line of work, it's rare to see someone as perfect as the leader. When Sakata mentioned the man, he couldn't help but bite the pipe. The leader is strong, handsome, and has the temperament of a leader and a heart of justice. He is a true hero, and no one in the industry doesn't admire him. Then why did you do it? When you saw the statue of God, did you try to push it down? I did, and not every time. Sakata suddenly laughed, and at the same time, he bit down harder on the pipe, so hard that it made a crunching sound. It was precisely because Kurosei Kazuma was too perfect that Sakata wanted to destroy him, or rather, destroy the foundation he had worked so hard for. Is this strange malice out of jealousy, or something else? Even Sakata didn't know. For a long time, Sakata didn't tell anyone about his thoughts until he met that man. Since birth, humans were the amalgamation of countless malice. You don't need to feel ashamed when you discover the strong malice in your heart. The ones who should feel ashamed are the humans who bound their natural evil with various chains. After accidentally meeting that man and chatting with her for a few minutes, Sakata seemed to have found his true self. From then on, Sakata let go of everything and began to carry out his own evil. I really want to see the wise leader's expression when he learns that the Rulon group has been torn apart and his son was thrown into the Gulf of Tokyo to feed the fish. Ha 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 ha. Even when death was near, Sakata still didn't have the slightest remorse, only some regret. Seeing that distorted face, Otani couldn't help but want to vomit. That's enough. Thank you for your honesty. Ryudo laughed as he dragged the man from the ground and dragged him to the second-floor balcony not far away. Chapter 36. As for Sakata, Ryudo didn't need to think much to know why he became like this. The reason was simple. Half of it was because of the malice in his heart, and the other half was because he met Tenmu-Ayam. For most people, there was a reason for doing evil. For fame, for profit, for women, for pride, and so on. But Tenmu-Ayam was different. Because of the black blood flowing in her body, doing evil was as instinctive as breathing for her. In addition, the woman had the ability to bewitch people comparable to hypnotism. Even if there was a little malice in one's heart, it would be magnified infinitely after talking to her. Therefore, Ryudo didn't even bother to listen to Sakata's disgusting screams as he dragged him to the balcony like a dead dog. At the same time, a large group of people had gathered outside the door on the first floor. Not long ago, there was a sudden gunshot from inside the mansion. Therefore, this group of experienced Extreme Dao members immediately wanted to break in, but they couldn't find a way. No, the door can't be pried open or smashed open. What about the back door? It's the same for the back door. It seems to be blocked by something from the inside. The ladder hasn't been brought over yet. Hurry up. Under the obstruction of the thick door Sakata made, the group of Extreme Dao members scratched their heads anxiously, but they could only anxiously look at the door. But just as they were waiting for someone to bring the ladder to the second floor, a familiar figure suddenly appeared on the balcony facing the door. "Hey, look, isn't that young Master Ryuto?" The first person to notice pointed to the balcony, and his voice sounded a little strange due to the shock. Suddenly, hundreds of people below looked at the balcony and were collectively stunned. In their imagination, no matter what kind of accident happened inside, young Master Ryuto was most likely done for. After all, everyone in the Rulon group knew that there was something wrong with the young master's brain, and he wasn't good at fighting. Other than having some status, he was completely useless. But who would have thought that this second-generation heir, who was regarded by everyone as the son of the group leader, would actually stand on the balcony in front of everyone's eyes? As Ryuto raised his hand, the man with a swollen face appeared before everyone's eyes. Although his face was swollen due to the beating, he could still vaguely tell that this person was Sakata Minoru just by looking at his figure and clothes. For a moment, there was complete silence in the huge front yard. It was as if one could hear a pin drop on the ground. How is this possible? Sakata boss. Before the higher-ups could figure out what had happened, Ryuto did something even more terrifying without hesitation. He lifted Sakata Minoru's plump body with both hands and threw him down from the second-floor balcony. Because it happened too suddenly, many people below didn't react for a while. In addition, humans had instincts for danger, so the crowd in the area where Sakata landed immediately moved to the side, leaving the boss with a hard floor to stand on. Bang! A body was thrown down from the second-floor balcony, and the sound of it hitting the floor was extremely shocking. Even if the people gathered here were a group of evildoers, they couldn't help but take 2 steps back when they saw Sakata's wriggling body on the ground. The second-floor balcony wasn't particularly high, so Sakata was still alive. He wasn't dead, but he wouldn't be able to get up for a while. Is there anyone else who wants to follow Sakata? If there is, get the hell up to the second floor, now. Following Ryuto's domineering and powerful roar, the thick door of the first-floor hall slowly opened from the inside. The ones who opened the door were Narukai Otani, whose hands were still bleeding, and Maoya Matsuri. Just the two of them faced hundreds of pairs of eyes outside. But even when the door opened, the crowd outside didn't dare to take half a step inside. Nonsense, who would dare to go up to the second floor at this time? Didn't they see Sakata boss being thrown down? The Sakata group was just formed today, and because they were about to fight the Rulon group, they were in a state of panic. The scene of Sakata being thrown down from the second-floor balcony by Ryuto completely destroyed their already weak fighting spirit. Seeing that the hundreds of people below didn't dare to make any moves, Ryuto took advantage of the situation and said, "Everyone, you were only bewitched by Sakata and forced to leave the dragon group, right?" Although Longdo used a question, his words didn't leave any room for people to say no. Clearly, Longdo had already given the people below him the best way out. You just have to admit that you were bewitched by Sakata. The culprit is Sakata, and you are also victims. Go back to your own homes and find your own mothers. Nothing happened today. If you don't admit it, then just like Sakata, you can wait for death. Needless to say, at this moment, Ryuto's figure was unprecedentedly tall in the eyes of the crowd. He stood high up on the balcony of the second floor and looked down at the people below with a cold gaze that seemed to be overlooking all living things. Even if he only had 2 men, and there were hundreds of members outside, it was as if he was the master here. Is this the original appearance of the young master? Sure enough, he is the son of the leader. The blood flowing in his body is the blood of the dragon. When they felt the aura of a true dragon, some of the Rulon group elders couldn't help but cry. In fact, the biggest reason they left with Sakata was because of the imprisonment of the leader, Kiryu Kazuma. The leader had been in prison for 30 years, and the chances of him being released in this lifetime were slim. The son he left behind was such a useless person. How could they not feel that the Rulon group was finished? But looking at the current Ryuto Kiryu, who would dare to say that the Rulon group was finished? Therefore, an old man who had been with the leader for many years couldn't help but shout, "Young Master Ryuto is wise. Young Master Ryuto is the best in the world." This shout obviously triggered a chain reaction, and the hundreds of people standing in the courtyard quickly shouted together, "Young Master Ryuto is wise. Young Master Ryuto is the best in the world." We pledge our lives to follow young Master Ryudo. Bah, do you bastards know how to speak? Say it again. But at this moment, Narukai Otani, who was standing at the door, shouted in a displeased tone, "Now you're still calling him young Master Ryudo? You should call him the second-generation leader." Second-generation leader? Suddenly, many people realized what was going on. Before, Ryudo had always been called young master because he was indeed only a young master. Even if he had the blood of the leader, no one thought that he could become the second-generation leader. But now it was different. Ryudo led 2 people into the enemy's formation and executed the traitor on the spot. Such courage and ability were naturally worthy of the title of the second-generation leader. Chapter 37. After being reminded by Narukai Otani, many people immediately reacted. Originally, after Hitoshi was confirmed to be in prison for a long time, the Brulon group should have chosen the second-generation leader a long time ago. However, at that time, Ryudo was still a good-for-nothing and could not be entrusted with important tasks. The 3 consultants were all doing their own things, so the position of the leader had always been empty. And now, with Ryudo's prestige, coupled with his ability and courage to charge into the tiger's den and kill the enemy's boss, it was obvious that there was no problem for this young master of the Rulon group to inherit his father's position. It could even be said that it was a done deal. Therefore, Otani took the lead and shouted, "The second-generation leader is wise. We swear to follow the second-generation leader to our deaths." The second-generation leader is wise. We swear to follow the second-generation leader to our deaths. The second-generation leader is wise. We swear to follow the second-generation leader to our deaths. Human beings had a serious herd mentality, especially in this kind of group activity. When Otani was the first to shout out, "second-generation leader," this term quickly spread throughout the entire Sakata mansion like water being released from a dam. Looking at the group of people who were originally his enemies shouting his name crazily, Ryudo, who was standing on the balcony looking down at everyone, could not help but feel a strong sense of accomplishment. This feeling is great. Humph! The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He wanted to show a dignified smile, but when it reached his mouth, it turned into a terrifying arc that was a combination of cruelty and hatred. Because of the previous conflict, Ryudo's body was more or less stained with blood. This blood, coupled with his cruel and hateful smile, under the dim light of the night, made him look like a demon god descending to the mortal world. *T, the second-generation leader's smile doesn't seem very friendly. Are we not shouting loudly enough? When they saw Ryudo's expression, the group of people below shouted even louder. Even if their throats were hoarse and their vocal cords were damaged, they did not care. This kind of performance directly led to the booming business of the throat department in the Kamashido area the next day. It was just that groups of extreme men lined up to see a doctor, which more or less scared the doctor. After a few minutes of shouting, Ryudo slowly stretched out his hand and signaled everyone below to be quiet. When he stretched out his hand, it gave off a feeling of power. He was not angry, but he was even more powerful when he was angry. "Brother Itama, how are you in prison? Your son has grown up now, and he's becoming more and more like you." When Ryudo reached out his hand, a few older members of the Rulon group had already had tears in their eyes. Their hearts were filled with the shadow of their former leader. "Everyone, let's bring this traitor back to the Dragon Group and put him on trial according to our family rules." "Who? Trial? Trial?" Following Ryudo's call, many members ran to Sakata, who was lying on the ground, and carried him out of the door like a pig. Poor Sakata, who was famous throughout his life, ended up like this in his middle age. He really deserved it. After arranging the next steps, Ryudo went down the stairs to the second floor, but he immediately saw a familiar figure. It was Yamamoto, the bodyguard who almost killed Ryudo last night. He was kneeling on the ground, looking at him with fear and trepidation. Yamamoto never dreamed that in just one day, Ryudo Kiryu would do something so earth-shattering. But no matter what, he could only hope that Ryudo would keep his promise and let him go. Second-generation leader, get out and don't appear in front of me again. I will never retaliate against you through any means." Before Yamamoto finished his trembling words, Ryuto had already walked toward the door without looking back. A promise is a promise. If he said he would let Yamamoto go, he must let Yamamoto go. Otherwise, wouldn't he be a scumbag? Second generation leader, is it really okay to let him go like this? Why don't I go in quietly? Looking at Yamamoto's back as he left happily, Otani, who was walking over, whispered to Ryuto. Then, he made a gotcha gesture. Indeed, Yamamoto can be said to have committed a heinous crime, and he knows a lot about Ryuto. Keeping him alive will always be a problem. However, Ryuto shook his head and smiled. It's okay. Don't worry about Yamamoto. Someone will help us solve it. What? Someone will. Well, as expected of the second generation leader, it seems that he already expected this. When Ryuto walked out of the door amidst the tsunami-like cheers, Otani also looked at the man who was younger than him with reverence. Not long after, the jubilant team at the Sakata mansion also walked onto the street and walked toward the Rulon Group headquarters at the other end of the street. At the same time, Yamamoto was running desperately in the dark alley. Although he looked somewhat embarrassed, Yamamoto's eyes were full of smiles. He actually really let me go. Long Do, that little brat, is really too inexperienced. After leaving the mansion, Yamamoto ran all the way to the headquarters of the Heavenly Eye Group. He couldn't wait to report what he knew to Ayam-sama, including Ryuto's changes, the cat house that appeared around him, and so on. And he also believed that he would definitely be rewarded and protected by Ayam-sama with this information. In this case, it would be easy to turn things around. Zung. Just as Yamamoto was happily thinking about the content of the report, there was a sudden tremor in the air. Then, the man only felt a pain in his heart, and his whole body fell to the ground uncontrollably. It can't be, right? Until his consciousness disappeared, Yamamoto didn't understand how he died. But at the last moment, he seemed to vaguely see a flash of silver-white hair, and everything was over. Tenmu was Ayam's lackey, so there was no value in living. After killing Yamamoto and rushing back to the Kamishiro courtyard, the figure of the cat house with rabbit balls was like an old owl under the night sky. What a cunning young master. No, it should be the cunning second-generation head. On the way back, Rabbit Ball couldn't help but shake his head. He more or less felt like he was used as a tool. Ryuto deliberately let Yamamoto go because he knew from the beginning that Rabbit Ball wouldn't let Yamamoto go back alive. After all, Yamamoto saw Rabbit Ball's face and knew that Rabbit Ball was in cahoots with Ryuto. He couldn't let him go back and report to Ayam. Such a young man actually likes miscolored glaze. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse for Kamiyoshi. Sigh. With a sigh, Rabbit Ball's figure gradually disappeared. But the night in Kamishiro had just begun. Chapter 38. Tonight, Kamadachi was extremely quiet. At the same time, tonight, Kamadachi was extremely noisy. For the upcoming collision between the two organizations, countless people held their breath on the surface, but they were constantly discussing it behind their backs. If Rulon Group and Sakatagumi really fought, who would be the final winner? After this battle, what would happen to Kamadachi? Also, how many familiar faces would disappear forever tomorrow morning? People nervously and excitedly imagined the scene that might happen next, and constantly reported through various means to observe the changes in the situation. But for Fujiki Yoshio, one of the three consultants of Rulon Group, he didn't think about anything. He just quietly maintained his beloved sword in the room. Starting from the bottom of the sword, he put a cleaning paper on the blade, gently held the paper wrapped around the blade, and gently wiped it up with his thumb and index finger. Fujiki didn't know how many times he had done this in the past. He could still recall the ridiculous appearance of almost cutting his finger the first time. But this should be the last time. After putting his beloved sword back into the scabbard, Fujiki in a solemn kimono stood up and opened the sliding paper door next to him. In the courtyard outside the paper door, dozens of subordinates wearing suits embroidered with the mark of the dragon were kneeling together. This group of people was the real elite members of Rulon Group, and they were on a completely different level from the gangsters gathered here. After seeing consultant Fujiki Yoshio walk out of the room, This group of elites also raised their heads solemnly, and their eyes flashed with a look of facing death. Very good. Today is a good day to die. Fujiki Yoshio was obviously very satisfied with his loyal subordinates. So in front of everyone, he suddenly pulled out his beloved sword, raised it to the sky, and shouted, "Brothers, that traitor Sakata wants to establish his own organization. Do you agree or not?" "No." Everyone also replied in a very imposing manner. "If you don't agree, what should we do?" "Kill, kill, kill." In the courtyard shrouded in the night, this group of extreme Dao elites seemed to ignite their blood as they shouted. Although there were only dozens of people, when they shouted like this, they really had the momentum of thousands of troops on the battlefield. Good. Fujiki Yoshio took a deep breath and finally shouted, "If that's the case, then come with me. No matter how much sacrifice we have to pay, we must capture that traitor Sakata." Lord Fujiki Yoshio, Ryudo young master has captured Sakata Minoru alive. Just as Tengmoto was about to lead his men to attack, and everyone in the courtyard was filled with excitement, a servant suddenly ran over and shouted these words that ruined the atmosphere. For a moment, the courtyard was silent. Fujimoto's beloved sword froze in midair, and the hot blood of the elites froze as well. After a while, Fujimoto reluctantly asked the attendant, "What nonsense are you talking about?" "Yoshio Shio Yoshio 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 Minoru. Yoshio Yoshio Yoshio. Yoshio Shio Yoshio Yoshio Minoru Yoshio Yoshio Minoru. Shio 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 Yoshio." Crazy. Either I'm crazy, or the world is crazy. Either way, someone is crazy. Fujimoto's face darkened as he led his subordinates towards the entrance of the headquarters. At the same time, he frantically rubbed his forehead with essential balm. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would faint on the spot. Of course, there was no essential balm in Japan. Tengbin had bought it when he was traveling to a neighboring country. It had a good effect on relieving headaches and was a must-have for the extreme Dao. At this moment, the entrance of the Rulon Group's headquarters was already brightly lit. There were more lights and more people, and this person was a very surprising person. Outside the imposing door, a large group of strong men were kneeling uniformly, looking very conspicuous, as if they were collectively performing some kind of suspicious ritual. In front of this group of people, Ryudo Kiryo, who was shorter and skinnier than an adult, was standing under a wooden plaque with the words, Ryukyu, written on it. He was gesturing at his subordinates around him. "Yes, yes, yes, hang him up properly, hang him in a more conspicuous position, and put on a light or something. It's best if it's a colorful light, like the kind used in KTV. It's more imposing." Although he looked young, the group of strong men surrounding him didn't dare to slack off at all. They faithfully carried out the young master's every order. But Ryudo's order at this time, it was quite punk. When Fujimoto rushed over with his men, he just happened to see Sakata's bruised body being hung up like a pig. Until now, Sakata was still alive, and his life was not in danger. Although he was wearing a cloth that barely covered his private parts, and his hands were tied with a rope and hung at the entrance of the Rulon Group's headquarters, Sakata really wanted to find someone to shoot him. It was too shameful, too shameful. Unlike other extreme dodo, Ryudo did not execute Sakata after catching him. Instead, he did something even more outrageous. Under Ryudo's arrangement, Sakata was hung up, and the spotlights below also shone on him from all directions. The spotlights were in various colors: red, green, blue, and white. It looked particularly festive, and it was even more festive when paired with Sakata's crazily twisting fat body. "Young Master Ryudo, what are you doing?" Fujimoto asked when he came to Ryuto, who was about to get some sound equipment to play Good Day around Sakata. His hands were constantly rubbing essential balm. Now, essential balm was equivalent to Fujimoto's heart medicine. 1 milliliter less would cause him to faint on the spot. After all, the scene in front of him was too exciting. Long Do laughed lightly. "It's nothing. I just went to Sakata's place and found out that the brothers were just deceived by him, so I kidnapped this guy and brought him back." The extreme dodo young master's words were quite casual, but of course, anyone with a brain bigger than a pine nut would not believe it. But when he saw the young master's confident and domineering appearance, Fujimoto could not help but take a deep breath. In Fujimoto's view, the current Ryudo gave off the feeling of a fish leaping over the Dragon Gate. He was completely different from the previous playboy who caused trouble every day. Could it be the leader and I were wrong? The young master should not waste his talent, but should continue on the path of extreme dodo? Fujimoto did not say anything that night. He just took out the good wine that he had kept for more than a decade and drank until he was dead drunk. Of course, the colorful spotlights at the entrance of the Rulon Group headquarters were also on all night, and there was a big sound system that repeatedly played a strange disco song that no one understood. Therefore, this night was called the Night of Shameful Righteousness by Kamamurachi. Don't ask how this word was coined. It was probably because of the two lines carved on Sakata's white butt. Chapter 39. A lot of things happened that night. For example, Ryudo finally registered his name on the Rulon Group as he wished and became a glorious rogue. For example, the Rulon Group and the Sakata Group once again merged into one, and 99% of the group members returned. For example, the entire Kamadachi knew about Ryudo Kiryo's mighty deeds, and even almost regarded him as a god descending to the mortal world. That's right, he was almost regarded as a god descending to the mortal world. Or he was almost praised as a god descending to the mortal world. In the middle of the night, the group of men had originally planned to fight the last fight of their lives, but who would have thought that they would be muddle-headedly watching the ultimate drama of eldest young master single-handedly capturing the traitors as if they were taking something from his pocket. Therefore, this group of Rulon Group members who were excited occupied almost the entire Kamadachi like a tornado. This feeling was like the cafeteria door that had just rung when the bell rang. They walked on the street with their chests puffed out, holding a variety of drinks in their hands, and bragging about their young master's miracles to everyone they saw. In life, it was normal to drink a little and brag, not to mention that this was not completely bragging. After all, Ryudo almost single-handedly stopped the war and also resolved a rebellion. This achievement was real, and in their view, it was not an exaggeration to boast about it. What's more, there were two members who were more eloquent and learned a little bit of mankai, Japanese crosstalk. They even built a shed and performed in front of the Kamadachi entrance. The crosstalk they performed was called Extreme Secret Book, Records of Ryudo Kiryo Yoshiyuki. Hey! When young Master Ryudo rushed into the enemy's formation, he shouted, "Old thief! Do you dare to fight me to the death?" Thousands of people around were shocked by the thunderous roar, and they didn't dare to move at all. They even wanted to kneel on the spot. Amazing! And then? That old scoundrel Sakata saw that the situation was bad and turned to run. Young Master Ryudo carried a large flag on his back and chased after him. When the old scoundrel saw young Master chasing after him, he was scared out of his wits. Helpless, he was stopped and could only brace himself for battle. What an old thief. The funny guy suddenly raised his voice. He's wearing bulletproof armor, holding a heavy machine gun, and carrying almost 10 bombs around his waist. He's armed to the teeth. He's an American warrior that's been trained with money. Shameless. Fuck America. But young Master Ryudo didn't panic at all. He pounced forward like lightning to dodge the machine gun's barrage and kicked the bulletproof armor into pieces. He held the old thief down and gave him a good beating. He beat that old man until he was dizzy, blood spurted out, his eyes cracked, and yellow and red blood flowed all over the ground. Yay! After listening to the story, the surrounding gangsters and passers-by couldn't help but applaud. They all paid their respects to the brave, wise, affectionate, and righteous young master of the Dragon Group. Tonight, similar flattery and mythical descriptions could be said to have filled the entire Kamadachi. If not for the fact that Ryudo himself was the main character, many of the stories were so vivid that even he himself would have believed them. That's right, he almost believed that he had rushed toward the fully armed Sakata wearing only a loincloth, dodged the machine gun's bullets with his bare hands, shattered the bulletproof armor with a kick, and easily took the head of the enemy general despite being surrounded by thousands of people. This was the power of rumors. But no matter how much nonsense it was, the lively night would eventually pass. The next morning, Ryudo woke up in a very masculine pink room. He turned on his phone and looked at the time. Monday, lunar day, 7:35 a.m. After Ryudo got out of bed, he put on clean clothes that still had the smell of sunlight. After washing up, he pushed open the courtyard door. Today's sun was very bright, and there were no clouds in the sky. It was a refreshing morning. Of course, it would be better if there weren't a group of bandaged men wearing black sunglasses kneeling outside the courtyard to greet him. Second-generation leader. Good morning. When Ryudo appeared, the group of Rulon group members who were already kneeling outside the courtyard immediately lowered their heads and said in unison. Before Ryudo could say anything, they led the second-generation leader outside. They also sang and danced along the way. It was quite noisy. This feeling was really not refreshing at all. In Ryudo's view, this strange situation was like being surrounded by a group of greasy sumo men early in the morning. One by one, they rubbed their greasy bodies against Ryudo. Outside the Rulon Group headquarters, there was already an exclusive car waiting for him. The driver was Narukai Otani. He was promoted to Ryudo's assistant last night due to his achievement of changing sides early. Second-generation leader. I wish you good luck. Huh. The group of members sent Ryudo to the car. For some reason, they acted like the wind is blowing and the water is cold. Some were even moved to tears. However, Ryudo left early in the morning. It was actually just to go to school. Yes, that's school. Today is Monday. I, Ryudo Kiryu, am a student of Dori First High School, so going to school is normal. But because of last night's heroic deed, Ryudo's body was covered with a layer of holy light. Therefore, it led to such a grand school ceremony. Phew. Actually, I just want to go to school peacefully. Sitting in the car all the way from the Shinmurachi area to the port area, Ryudo looked at the scenery outside the window. He didn't know how to describe his complicated feelings. Ryudo's Dori First High School was located in the center of the Tokyo port area. It was the most famous high school in the city. The teachers in this school were strong. There were even a lot of people who were born in rich and famous families. In the future, they would bear the fate of the country. Of course, Ryudo Kiryu was not included. After all, this young Master Kyoto couldn't even recognize the 26 English letters. He was an existence between illiteracy and idiocy. The reason why Ryudo was able to enter this high school was mainly because of his father's favor. It was said that the principal of Dori First High School had a dispute with Kyoto at a nightclub. His head was almost smashed on the spot. In the end, it was Kazuma who passed by that saved him. As the car slowly moved forward, there were more men and women in uniforms on the surrounding streets. When he saw the familiar uniforms and streets, Ryudo couldn't help but show a happy smile. In Red Photo Album 2, No Survivors, Dori First High School was the main game location. At least 60% of the events happened in the school. The most important thing was that 2 of the 3 heroines went to school here. The third heroine also transferred here. It could be said that it was the holy land of love games. Dori First High School, I'm coming. At the moment when he got off the car, Ryudo stood in front of the familiar school gate and looked up at the familiar school emblem at the front gate. However, what he didn't know was that his sudden stop had caused a human dragon to appear on the street behind him. Chapter 40. Today's Dori No. 1 High School was known as the gathering place of the Golden Generation by insiders. Don't know if it was suddenly discussed, but the entire elite of Tokyo sent their children to this school during this period of time. For a time, the Dori No. 1 High School was surging. According to incomplete statistics, there were at least hundreds of parents who had a net worth of hundreds of millions or who held various kinds of power. However, among them, the most eye-catching were the 3 young ladies known as the Misaka 3 families. The royal family who ruled Shinto, the Kanzaki, the multinational technology company, the Tsukamori, and the ancient warrior clan with a long history, the Tungtong. Very coincidentally, these 3 young ladies not only had an extremely noble background, but also extremely beautiful appearance. They also studied in the first-year class A, the second-year class A, and the third-year class A, these 3 elite classes. Therefore, the 3 of them were collectively known as the Misaka 3 families, representing their noble status. Of course, In addition to the Misaka 3 families, Ryudo Kiryu was naturally a well-known figure in the Dori No. 1 high school. Unfortunately, his reputation was 100% notorious, especially after last night's Kamikaze Sakuryu night. Last night's Kamadachi storm had naturally swept through the entire Dongjing. And this kind of thing, as the number of people who read it increased, it led to the content becoming more and more excessive. Even early in the morning, there was already a bullshit rumor that Ryudo personally killed hundreds of thousands of people last night, killing until Kamisato turned into a river of blood. Don't know if the people of Kamisato were enough for him to kill. In this case, as the time passed, the 8:30 school deadline was getting closer and closer. However, inexplicably, there were 2 long lines in front of the Dori No. 1 high school. The gate of this high school was actually very wide, and dozens of students walking side by side was not a problem. But why were the students who came to class lined up on both sides and didn't walk through the large open space in the middle? At this time, a student who had not yet woken up also found this problem. He was a male high school student who looked to be only 16 or 17 years old. He was tall and had a ferocious look on his face. To be specific, he was the high school version of Fat Tiger. Moreover, Fat Tiger's father was an executive of a certain company. His family was quite rich, and he had been used to being tyrannical since he was young. It was this guy who looked like he was not to be trifled with. When he saw the long line on both sides of the school gate, he walked towards the center unwillingly. What the hell? Are these guys crazy? Wasn't the road in the middle very spacious? Why didn't they dare to leave? He rubbed his sleepy eyes and took a few steps toward the middle of the door. Then, he saw the figure standing in the middle of the door. The first thing he saw was a head of dazzling yellow hair. His yellow hair stood on end. From the back, he looked like a sea urchin or a starfish. For some reason, it made people feel that this person's card-playing skills were not bad. Hey, who are you? Tong. Ryudo Kiryu. When Fat Tiger came to Longdo and patted him on the shoulder, Longdo also turned his head to look at him. Fat Tiger's ferocious face immediately collapsed. It's over. How could it be him? Why didn't I notice it? In an instant, the surrounding students looked at Fat Tiger with pity in their eyes. It felt like they were using their eyes to send a message like, "Young man, you have a long way to go. See you in the next life." Huh. Who is this guy? My friend? After being patted on the shoulder by Fat Tiger, Ryudo also woke up from his memories of this school. He turned his head and looked at the high school student who was covered in cold sweat. In fact, when Ryudo came to this Dori First High School, he could not help but be immersed in the scenes in the game to the point that he forgot the passage of time. This caused him to stand in the middle of the door like a stone, as if he was in some kind of strange thought. Naturally, the people who saw this scene were also shocked by the strange actions of the second generation of the Rulon group. Is he planning to do something to Dori First High School? This guy is crazy. It's better to stay away. A gentleman does not stand by a collapsing wall. Under the guidance of this way of thinking, the students consciously bypassed Ryudo from both sides and entered the school gate. The scene looked like Moses parting the sea. However, when Ryudo and Fat Tiger's eyes met, the latter's body immediately froze. He quickly curled up his tall body as if he was trying to turn himself from Fat Tiger into a small man. Bean-sized beads of sweat continued to slide down from his head. His legs were slightly bent as if he was ready to kneel at any time. The muscles on his face also quickly squirmed as if he was trying to twist into a flattering expression. However, it was the opposite and looked very funny. When Ryudo saw the change in this guy's state, he was somewhat confused. What's going on? Did something terrifying appear? He turned his head and looked behind him. He found that the surrounding area was empty. The nearest students were 5 meters away. Nothing terrifying had appeared. So why was this guy so scared? Ryudo scratched his head. He didn't seem to realize that the person Fat Tiger was afraid of was himself. So, Ryudo asked in a friendly manner, "Student, are you okay?" Although his tone was very friendly, in Fat Tiger's eyes, there was a strong murderous intent in this kindness. What's going on? Why is Master Ryudo asking me this question? Wait, is he hinting at something with Jidao slang? Suddenly, Fat Tiger understood. He understood the hidden meaning in this seemingly ordinary conversation. "Student, do you know what you are? Are you okay?" Patting my shoulder. "Do you want to die?" "I'm very sorry. Forgive me for being rude." In an instant, Fat Tiger hurriedly knelt on the ground with lightning speed and bowed in an extremely standard posture. Just as Fat Tiger knelt, there was a burst of discussion in the crowd that was trying to suppress. "This person is so scary. He forced people to kneel in front of the school gate as soon as he arrived? Don't look at him. That guy is probably crazy. He killed so many people last night, and he dares to swagger to school today. He's so pitiful. If I was in the same class as him, I would probably ask to drop out today." Although the surrounding discussion was scattered, it was like a storm that constantly swept through the area, pushing the fierce reputation of Battle Dragon to another peak. What's going on? Could it be that they were afraid of me? Long Do, on the other hand, was stunned for a moment before he realized why there was such a ridiculous situation around him. "Don't, students. I came to school to study and fall in love. It's for the sweet campus life. You guys are treating me like a demon king. How am I supposed to live my sweet life on campus like this?" Chapter 41. "No, I'm not that kind of bad guy. I have to let them know that I'm a good person." In order to change his image, Ryudo decided to do some kind actions to let everyone know that he was not that kind of bad guy. So with a gentle smile on his face, he smiled at Fat Tiger and said, "Student, you should get up first. This is the school gate. It's not appropriate to kneel here." Ryudo thought his smile was very kind, but in fact, in the eyes of Fat Tiger and the surrounding students, it was a completely different scene. In the eyes of everyone, Ryudo Kiryo's mouth raised a strange arc, and his eyes released a strong murderous intent as if he was looking at a corpse. "It's over. It's over. It's over." After hearing these words, Fat Tiger's body trembled even more, and even his crotch was almost wet, because Ryudo's words just now had a completely different meaning in his ears. "Student, you should get up first. Bastard, do you think kneeling is enough? This is the school gate. It's not appropriate to kneel here. When you leave the school, I will throw you to the Tokyo Bay to feed the fish." "Whoa, I'm sorry. I'll go back and write my will right away." So in the next moment, Fat Tiger finally couldn't bear such a huge pressure and quickly ran toward the sun in the distance. As soon as Fat Tiger ran, the surrounding students couldn't help but tremble. "No way. This Ryudo Kiryo is too much, right? A death threat early in the morning? He wants me to go back and write my will? Shh, don't say his name. Something bad will happen." "Yes, then we'll use Mysterious Man instead." This is what was done in Harry Peter and the Stone Ghost Mask. As the students walked into the school gate trembling, from this moment on, Ryudo had his own new nickname, Mysterious Man. It had to be said that although this nickname was quite awe-inspiring, Long Do was truly wronged. He couldn't explain it now, and no one would believe him. Anything he said would be misinterpreted. This was the reality. What the hell? Isn't my identity a little too difficult? With a sigh, Ryudo walked into the first high school. His previous excitement could be said to have been completely extinguished. Now, it was obvious that the students were very afraid of him. They felt that he was a psychopath who killed without batting an eyelid. This was simply outrageous. Ryudo himself might not be a good student, but at least he was a normal person. At most, he would just hang people up and turn on the fluorescent lights. But after all, public opinion can distort gold, causing accumulated information to corrode the bones. Rumors are fearful and can reverse right and wrong. It really wasn't difficult to kill people from a societal point of view by relying on rigid prejudices without real evidence. If Ryudo did not find a way to reverse the situation, he would probably have to spend the next 2 years as a mystery man. If that was the case, it would be better to just quit school and leave, so that he wouldn't have to endure such humiliation. As he walked, Ryudo could not help but feel that such a world was rather boring. But after walking for a while, a familiar figure appeared in front of him. It was a middle-aged man in a suit. He had a square face, and he looked very strict. Isn't this Mr. Mei-yuan? So this is what he looks like. In the game, Mei-yuan was the class teacher of the main character's grade 2 class A, and he was also a core character who often appeared. Although he was strict and old-fashioned, he valued the students very much. He was a rare good teacher. Later on, there was even a famous scene where he confronted the Heavenly Eye group in order to save the main character's group. So when he passed by, Ryudo casually bowed to Mei Yuan and said, "Good morning, Mr. Mei Yuan." Good morning. Originally, Mr. Mei Yuan also turned his head and replied to Ryuto with familiarity. But before he finished his words, the expression on his face was strongly distorted. To be honest, it was the first time that Ryuto saw such an exaggerated expression on Mei Yuan's old-fashioned square face. He actually twisted his square face into Anne's shape, as if he was trying his best to put on a show. How is this possible? Could it be that I stayed up too late last night to mark the test papers, so I'm hallucinating? For the first time in his life, Mr. Mei Yuan had the thought that there was something wrong with his eyes or his brain. After all, even if he was willing to admit that there was something wrong with him, he was not willing to admit that Ryudo Kiryu would greet him so early in the morning. Didn't this guy always walk in a way that didn't recognize anyone? Didn't he like to stare at people with his nostrils and treat teachers as nothing? Why would he greet me? And with such a kind expression? Not good. There must be something wrong with my condition. What is the problem? Is there a tumor in my brain? Or is there a hallucination or auditory hallucination? Can I still be saved? Medical technology is so advanced now. If it's early, there should still be time. Thinking of this, Mei Yuan couldn't help but sweat profusely. Sweat soaked his face, shirt, and pants. At the same time, it also strengthened Mei Yuan's determination to go to the hospital after school to do a full body check. Just as Mei Yuan suspected that he had some kind of illness, Ryudo had already arrived at the second-floor corridor of the teaching building and was walking towards his Grade 2 Class B. Generally speaking, the school corridor at this time was very crowded. But when Ryudo appeared, the students in the corridor consciously moved closer to the sides. Whether male or female, they all turned around to face the wall or outside the wall. They didn't dare to look at Ryudo, who was walking in the middle of the corridor. The corridor is so wide and smooth. After understanding that this situation could not be changed for the time being, Long Do could only go with the flow and walk forward. It didn't take long before Ryudo arrived at the door of Grade 2 Class B. From the door, he could clearly hear the lively sound coming from inside. Dozens of boys and girls were happily enjoying the last relaxing time before class. But the moment Ryudo's figure appeared, the originally lively sound inside suddenly disappeared. The atmosphere was as cold as a funeral parlor preparing for a funeral. Do you know how fast a woman's face changes? Faster than flipping a book. Do you know how fast the students of Grade 2 Class B collectively change their faces? Faster than flipping a book. 1 second. In just 1 second, Grade 2 Class B was completely silent. It felt as if someone had cast a silence debuff on all the students in the classroom. With my identity as a teacher, I can guarantee that the students won't even dare to fart in class. After looking at the group of students who were as scared as rabbits, Ryudo slowly walked towards his seat in the second last row by the window. He walked abnormally slowly. It wasn't that Ryudo usually walked this slowly, but he was afraid that if he walked a few steps faster, he would scare people into the hospital. When Ryudo sat down and looked out the window, the students in the class finally relaxed, but they still didn't dare to breathe loudly. My sweet school life. Forget it. I'll just have a chat with the young mistress. In order to not scare the students, Ryudo could only keep his head facing the window. Then he openly took out his phone and sent a message to Kenzaki Colored Glaze from Grade 2 Class A. Chapter 42. In the entire Dori No. 1 high school, the only person who could speak normally to Ryudo was probably the scion from Year 2 Class A next door, Kenzaki Colored Glaze. Just as Ryudo was bored and sent a message to the scion, Year 2 Class A next door was currently in a state of laziness before class started. A group of young, healthy, and energetic high school students were either studying their textbooks or whispering to their friends. The atmosphere was no different from an ordinary high school class. Of course, this group of people who didn't have much of a difference definitely didn't include the young lady who sat in the second last row by the window. Although they were all sitting in the same classroom, anyone who entered the classroom, as long as they weren't blind, would involuntarily look in her direction. Of course, one of the reasons for this was the girl's beauty, but that wasn't the only reason. Kenzaki-colored glaze was indeed very beautiful. Her small, white face seemed to have been carved out of ice. Her features were beautiful, and her figure was slender and slender. She was flawless from head to toe, but apart from her natural beauty, what left an even deeper impression on others was her imposing figure, as well as the cold aura that seemed to emanate from her heart. Her chin was slightly raised, her back was perfectly straight, and her red lips were slightly narrowed. She seemed like a human-shaped jade sculpture. This special aura that far exceeded her age, and coupled with Kenzaki-colored glaze's family background, which was quite eye-catching even in this school, it was enough to make her seem like a crane in a flock of chickens. With such a dignified young lady sitting here, the consequence was that not many students in grade 2 class had dared to get close to her, let alone have the guts to sneak a peek at her. It felt as if there was an invisible barrier between her and the world, elegantly separating this girl from the mortal world, preventing her from being tainted by even a speck of dust. But was such a barrier really what the scion wanted? Not at all. Colored Glaze also wanted to be like other students, chatting with friends when she had nothing to do, eating lunch together, going shopping together, and so on. After all, her identity as a colored glaze made it impossible for her to interact with others as she wished. Even if it was just a meeting between friends, there were still many restrictions. Zhaiwang was equivalent to a statue of a god, a living statue of a god. People would feel respect for the statues, but they would also feel a sense of awe towards them, causing them to not dare to approach them. Colored Glaze was already used to this kind of life, or rather, she had already given up on it. Beep. Beep, beep, beep. Just as the teacher was about to arrive, Colored Glaze suddenly felt an almost inaudible vibration. The vibration came from the bag hanging beside the desk. Of course, Colored Glaze's bag didn't have anything else that would vibrate. It was just a normal reaction after receiving a message. Information? Who was it? Generally speaking, there weren't many people who would send messages to Colored Glaze, no more than 5. Thus, she curiously picked up her phone and opened the text message page. This message was from Ryuto Kiryu. Although there weren't many people who knew Colored Glaze's phone number, she just happened to exchange numbers with Ryuto yesterday. However, Colored Glaze was still somewhat baffled as to why Ryuto would send her a message at this time. But she still used her slender and dexterous fingers to quickly open the letter and read the content inside. Miss, now everyone in the school is treating me like a lunatic who ran out of a mental hospital. What should I do? Please reply quickly. I'm burning with anxiety. By Ryuto Kiryu. When she saw the message, Colored Glaze couldn't help but laugh. This laugh was like 100 flowers blooming, suddenly making this proud scion a lot cuter. So pitiful. Is it because of what happened at Kamishimachi yesterday? With Colored Glaze's intelligence, she naturally didn't even have to think about what happened to Ryuto. Last night's spectacular Kamishimachi Ryuto night could be said to be quite famous, and it was even discussed in various forums on the internet. People were excitedly predicting the outcome of the civil war between Rulon Group and Sakata Group, and some people even opened bets on whether the two groups would disappear that night. After all, in the eyes of ordinary people, Extreme Tao was like a rat in the sewer. Everyone wanted them to fight each other to the death, and it would be best if they all died. However, the appearance of Ryuto Kiryu changed everything. The young master of Rulon Group cleaned up the scene like a god, quickly captured Sakata, and reunited the divided Rulon Group, which could be described as shocking. In this case, it wasn't difficult for Colored Glaze to imagine what people would think of Ryuto when he came to school the next day. Of course, Colored Glaze knew that Ryuto wasn't the kind of monster that fell from the sky, like in the rumors. Although this guy's brain was a bit strange, he was still a good person. This wasn't a good person card. So Colored Glaze also smiled and replied with 4 simple words, "Can't help? Can't help?" So cold. After looking at the reply that was immediately sent back, Ryuto's mouth twitched, and he showed an indescribable expression. However, the change in his expression startled the teacher who just walked into the classroom. What's going on? Why did I see Ryuto Kiryu curling his lips at me as soon as I came in? Is there something wrong with my outfit today that he doesn't like? Thinking of this, the math teacher quickly and solemnly fixed his clothes and hair, then stood on the podium with trepidation. However, Ryudo didn't notice the change in the teacher's expression at all. Instead, he continued to attack colored glaze with text messages. Although he was isolated in school, Ryudo didn't want to give up. Since he came to this world of love games, he naturally wanted to live a romantic and youthful high school life. Therefore, first of all, Ryudo needed to think of some ways to make himself popular. Miss, if I join the baseball team now and help the school team reach Koshien, will the students change their view of me? By Ryudo Kiryopft. Ha ha ha. If Liuli hadn't covered her mouth in time when she saw the message, her laughter would have probably spread throughout the entire grade 2 class A. What is this guy thinking? A guy who has never played baseball wants to lead the team to Koshien. Why don't you fly, idiot? So Colored Glaze could only continue to reply. Not likely, after all, when you join the baseball team, the other players will choose to retire. So cruel. Seeing that his plan didn't work, Ryudo continued to scratch his head and think. Of course, while he was thinking, he also sent his idea to Colored Glaze, and then it was rejected by Colored Glaze. This repeated until noon. Chapter 43. What should I do? Why can't I come up with so many ideas? When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, and the students of grade 2 class B ran out of the classroom, Ryudo was still scratching his ears and cheeks as he pondered. In just one morning, Ryudo sent more than 100 messages to Colored Glaze. He was like a sick boyfriend with a strong desire for control. But in reality, the two of them weren't boyfriend and girlfriend. It was more like an old mother and a silly son. And after a whole morning of texting, Colored Glaze had a new understanding of Ryudo Kiryo. Previously, in Colored Glaze's opinion, Ryudo was a kind of honest and naive guy, but he was a nice guy. But after a whole morning, Colored Glaze found out that he was a bit of a delusional maniac. According to incomplete statistics, Ryudo's school popularity plan had the following contents. First, create a light music club and recruit a few high school girls to drink tea together every day. At the same time, work hard at the martial arts arena. Second, join the basketball club, dye your hair red, practice dunking from the free throw line, and prepare to dominate the national competition. Third, learn to sing and dance in order to save Dory No. 1 High School, which was gradually losing its reputation. Become an idol at any time and debut at the school. The above three plans were the most normal ones among the countless that Ryudo came up with. It was easy to imagine how ridiculous the other plans were. Regarding this, Luli expressed that she simply did not know what was in his head. How could he come up with so many nonsensical plans? Also, can you, a gangster boss, stop thinking about such nonsense all the time? You give off the feeling of a teenage girl in love? This is the first time I've seen a big boss so eager to be popular with his classmates. Dancing costume. Do you think his brain is? Dancing costume? Where is he? Colored Glaze, who was sitting in Year 2 Class A, instinctively looked to her right, only to find that the table on her right was already empty. Since Colored Glaze was studying in Year 2 Class A, her bodyguard, 16 Nights dancing costume, was naturally there as well. Logically speaking, the dancing costume should be by the Colored Glaze's side after class, but at this time, the wuxia suddenly disappeared without a trace. Where's the dancing costume? The answer was in Year 2 Class B next door. Tong Sheng, I have something to tell you. Just as Long Tu leaned his head on the table and stared blankly, a cold voice suddenly came from in front of him. This voice is dancing costume? Ryudo looked up and saw 16 Nights in dancing costume standing upright in front of the table. Her face was a little red, and her hands were a little flustered, as if she didn't know where to put them. Because they were in school, dancing costume was wearing a standard female uniform. Small leather shoes, a pleated skirt, short sleeves, and a jacket. This uniform was naturally more suitable for her age than the work uniform she wore last night, and it also softened dancing costume's temperament a lot. However, her bashful girlish attitude, coupled with her "I have something to say to you" speech, and the empty classroom with only the two of them, made it easy for people to misunderstand. A romantic atmosphere floated in the air. The girl's slightly hurried breathing also made the atmosphere in the classroom reach the level of a forbidden book. And Ryudo immediately reacted and sincerely said, "I'm sorry, 16 Nights classmate. I don't think we're suitable for each other. You deserve better." Huh. Wait, do you think? Bah. Originally, Ryudo thought that Dancing Costume would be sad and cry after being rejected by him, but who knew that her face showed a mix of disgust, and many other negative emotions. After taking a deep breath and forcefully suppressing the urge to punch this stinky man in the face, Dancing Dress asked helplessly, "You can't be thinking that I'm here to confess to you, right? Don't feel shy. It's completely normal for you to like me. Phew. Don't worry, even if I like ghosts, I won't like you." Okay, let's skip this topic. The atmosphere is a bit awkward. What did you want to say to me? You still have the nerve to say that? Who was it that made the atmosphere so awkward? If Dancing Costume didn't sincerely apologize this time, she really wanted to kick Ryudo to the wall. But even if she was teased, Dancing Costume accepted her fate and bowed to Ryudo and solemnly said, "I'm very sorry because of my misunderstanding last night. It almost led to serious consequences. I would like to express my sincerest apology." Without a doubt, Dancing Costume's apology was sincere. After all, just last night, this Kamiyoshi samurai almost kicked Ryudo in the balls and almost got strangled to death. So in the end, when she found out that Ryudo was actually a good person, and he even saved the young Mrs. Companion, Dancing Costume had to apologize. It had to be said that Dancing Costume's apology posture was very accurate. Her back was straight, her hands were on her legs, her waist was straight at a 45-degree angle, her head was slightly lowered, and her eyes were looking at her feet. Even if a Japanese bowmaster was to do a demonstration, he probably wouldn't be able to do a more accurate apology posture than Dancing Costume's. However, although Dancing Costume's apology was very sincere, and her posture was very accurate, Ryudo still just shook his head, because this scene in his eyes was very funny. "Raise your head, 16 Nights Dancing Costume." Ryudo stood up from the chair and said in a condescending tone. Sensing that Ryudo's tone didn't sound like he was forgiving her, Dancing Costume helplessly asked, "Is the angle of my bow not enough?" "The angle of your bow? What is that? Which normal person would care about such a small thing? Then what are you dissatisfied with my apology?" "What I'm dissatisfied with the most is your attitude of thinking that by bowing, you can understand everything." At this point, Long Do turned around and sat on a table at the side, crossing his legs high up. The Japanese have a bad habit of bowing as an apology. However, in the eyes of Ryudo and his group of extreme das, this is a meaningless and shameless action. If you owe someone money and can't pay it back, bow. If there's a problem with your product or strategy, bow. Even if you do something that harms all of humanity, bow. Bow, bow, bow. What's the use of a hammer if you bow? You think you can wash away your sins by bowing your head? Does this change anything? Does this reflect anything? For example, 16 Nights Dancing Costume almost killed me because of a misunderstanding, and you think that by bowing, you're done? Are you treating me like a fool? Shing. So before Dancing Costume could react, Ryudo took out a sharp dagger out of nowhere and stuck it on the table next to him. Don't make a fool of yourself by bowing like a coward. If you really want to apologize, cutting off a finger or two to show your sincerity is reasonable, right? Right? Looking at the shocked Dancing Costume, Ryudo casually said these words to her that sounded very out of the ordinary. However, in the world of extreme das, this wasn't out of the ordinary. Instead, it was common sense and the duty of a man. Chapter 44. In the world of extreme Tao, this group of dark dwellers had invented many methods of punishment that sounded chilling. Things like heating up an iron bed, kneeling on it and kowtowing, piercing nails through the body, bathing in boiling oil. It was almost the torture of the 18 levels of hell. And the purpose of all this was to make others truly regret their actions, carving the words, "I won't dare to do it again," into their bones. An extreme Tao moneylender once said, when those despicable trash can't pay back the money, they always like to lower their heads to their waists, or even kneel down and kowtow to express their apology. What a joke. However, it was just a bow. What loss could there be? Even if they kneeled on the ground and kowtowed until their heads bled. So what? At most, they would go back and put a bandage on their heads, and the next day, they would be a brand new piece of trash. What kind of repentance would they make? Therefore, if they wanted to sincerely apologize, they would have to use some practical methods. For example, if they did something wrong, they could cut off a finger or a toe, or kowtow 10 times on an iron plate. If they did something even more serious, they could commit seppuku as an apology. Wasn't there such a fine tradition in Bushido? Why didn't they have the guts to continue? To put it bluntly, if they didn't even dare to cut off a finger and didn't want to bear the pain of an apology, that was shameless. Look, I've already lowered my head. I've already knelt down. Why won't you forgive me? Sob, sob, sob. F***CKU. I want you to lower your head? What I want is your head, okay? This kind of person only cared about trifles and didn't dare to bear the consequences. They could only pretend to admit their mistakes by bowing without paying any price. It was simply despicable. Therefore, the members of Extreme Tao would never accept a normal bow as an apology. They even expressed their disdain for the trash of society who did this. Of course, this kind of common sense only existed in Extreme Tao. Normal people wouldn't have such thoughts. Although 16 Nights Dancing Costume wasn't a normal person, her thoughts weren't that hardcore. I just came to apologize. Why would I be forced to cut off my finger? Dancing Costume was dumbfounded when she saw the dagger stuck into the table. But on second thought, the Dancing Costume had almost killed Ryudo last night. This was an undeniable fact. Even if Ryudo was still alive in the end, it was still considered an attempted murder. It was not wrong to use a finger as an apology. What? Did he not dare? You're already so obedient when you bow, but when it hurts, you're scared? Just as Dancing Costume was staring at the dagger in cold sweat, Ryudo's strange voice came from the side. Scared? My 16 Nights Dancing Costume is a coward? Her words angered Dancing Costume. She had grown up under the special training of putting rabbit balls in the cat house. Although she was still young, she was now a veteran who had experienced countless big scenes. Very well. If you think this is an apology, then I'll compensate you with this finger. Accompanied by Dancing Costume's angry shout, she quickly picked up the dagger and cut off her left index finger without hesitation. This could be said to be quite decisive, leaving no room for retreat. It's just a finger. What's the big deal? I'll cut it off. However, just as Dancing Costume's left index finger was about to fly out of her body, a strong hand directly grabbed her wrist. It was Ryudo. When the blade was about to reach her body, Ryudo stopped the bloody scene that was about to happen. I did accept your apology, so let's forget about what happened before. This time, Ryudo gently took back the dagger from Dancing Costume's hand and put it into the hidden pocket of his sleeve. If Dancing Costume's previous bow was a way of apologizing, then this time the decision to cut off her finger was enough. Although Dancing Costume's forehead was covered with fine sweat, she still sneered. What? Didn't you just say it clearly and logically? Why don't you dare let me cut it off? Well, you should at least have some common sense. After all, you can't do this kind of thing in school, right? Wouldn't it be troublesome if your credits were deducted? Speaking of this, Ryudo reached out and patted Dancing Costume's head, ridiculing this Kamiyoshi samurai for having no common sense. God, this was really the funniest joke Dancing Costume had ever heard in her life. You, Ryudo Kiryu, the second generation of Extreme Tao who carried this thing everywhere, how could you say something like, wouldn't it be troublesome if your credits were deducted? And someone like you who wanted someone to cut off your finger for an apology, did you have any common sense at all? For a moment, Dancing Costume was completely dumbfounded. She couldn't even find the right words to describe this strange person whose brain had reached a ridiculous level. The moment she came to her senses, Dancing Costume immediately shouted angrily, Ryudo Kiryu, you. Hey, milady, long time no see. How have you been? Just as Dancing Costume was about to throw away her dignity and loudly scold this bastard of a young master, Ryudo waved behind her with a brilliant smile. Milady? Could it be? Dancing Costume hurriedly turned around and saw that colored glazed Kanzaki's figure had appeared at the entrance of Year 2 Class B's classroom at some unknown time. and she was covering her face as she watched this scene. And so, Dancing Costume hurriedly ran to the door, gulped, and nervously asked, "Milady, when did you arrive?" "Ever since that guy said that you had no common sense." Colored Glaze's tone was rather helpless, as if she didn't know how to explain to Dancing Costume in detail. "Phew, that's good. Milady didn't see my idiotic expression when I held the dagger." Dancing Costume sighed in relief when she heard this, but she still turned around and glared fiercely at Ryuto. "Dancing Costume, I'm hungry. Go arrange for the waiter to bring some food over." "Yes, I'll go to the garden and prepare it right away." After receiving Milady's order, Dancing Costume hurriedly ran out the door, leaving only Ryuto and Colored Glaze in Year 2 Class A. Dory First High School had many important people's children studying here, so the school security was definitely tight enough. This also meant that Dancing Costume didn't have to constantly stick to Colored Glaze like glue. After Dancing Costume left, Ryuto leisurely walked over with a smile. "I didn't think that Milady would lie. You clearly came over when Dancing Costume bowed to me, didn't you? Did you enjoy watching?" "Humph. I just wanted to see what kind of tricks you had up your sleeves, and I ended up with such a terrible performance? In any case, you wouldn't make Dancing Costume chop off her finger, would you? As long as her sincerity is on point, it's fine. What I want is her sincerity in apologizing to me, not her finger. And if it's not on point, I've already given her a chance to be decent. If she's not decent, then I can only help her be decent. Then should I thank you on behalf of Dancing Costume? There's no helping it. After all, she's responsible for protecting Colored Glaze Kanzaki. How can Milady's bodyguard be a coward who doesn't even dare to chop off her finger?" After hearing Ryuto's explanation, Colored Glaze pursed her lips and only said one word after a while. "Lunatic." Ryuto didn't comment on this word, and only shrugged with a smile. Unfortunately, what he didn't know was that Colored Glaze actually didn't say the second half of her sentence out loud. "Lunatic, but I like it." Chapter 45. Generally speaking, the students of Dory First High School would spend their lunch break at school. The students would gather in groups of 2s and 3s. Some would eat the lunchboxes they bought from home. Some would go to the welfare department to buy some bread, and some would line up at the cafeteria to get food. Of course, Kanzaki Ruri was a noble scion. Naturally, she wouldn't just casually eat lunch with him. Her lunch was specially prepared by the chefs of Kamiyoshi and delivered to her in a rush. The freshest ingredients were carefully prepared by the best chefs, making it exquisite, elegant, and nutritious. It emphasized the visual, the taste, and the combination of utensils made it seem like a beautiful ancient painting. Such exquisite food combined with the fresh scenery in the garden and the beautiful weather created a young lady's meal that Dancing Costume would be proud of. Every day at noon, the two of them would elegantly sit on the silk cushions and chat while enjoying delicious food. This was one of Dancing Costume's happiest moments. But today at noon, all this beauty that should have existed was completely destroyed by a certain someone. "Wah wah wah. This dish tastes all right, but it's a bit bland. Is your chef unwilling to add salt and seasoning?" Under 16 Nights Dancing Costume's murderous gaze, Ryuto casually sat down with them on the cushions, and his chopsticks quickly picked up all sorts of delicious food from the lunchboxes in front of him. Why are you so thick-skinned as to join us for a meal?" When Ryuto came over with the young lady to eat, Dancing Costume's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Ryuto's answer was very simple. "You two are my only friends in school. I don't know anyone else, so I can only rely on you two." "Are you kidding me? How can there be such a shameless person in the world? Is it our fault that you don't have any friends? And when did I become friends with you, bastard? Didn't you just tell me to cut off my finger?" Seeing this young master of extreme Tao sitting on the ground in a manner that did not conform to the table etiquette at all, he threw all kinds of high-class dishes into his mouth. Dancing Costume almost couldn't stop herself from picking up her chopsticks and poking them into his nostrils. She wanted to figure out if this guy's brain was actually filled with charcoal-roasted pig brains. It had to be said that the way Ryuto Kiryu was eating was a stark contrast to Kanzaki's colored glaze. Luli was kneeling on the cushion in an elegant posture. She gently picked up a piece of food, held it under her hand, and then put it into her dark red lips. Then, she started chewing without leaving a trace. Watching the young miss eat was like a kind of enjoyment. It was hard to imagine that someone could eat so beautifully. Of course, the premise was that there wasn't a bastard beside him who was stuffing a pile of delicious food into his mouth. What impressed Dancing Costume was that the colored glaze didn't react at all to the guy sitting next to her. She continued eating and drinking calmly. Phew, I'm full. By the way, young miss, have your chef make something a little more intense tomorrow. If it's too bland, I'll get hungry very quickly. 10 minutes later, Ryudo, who had finished eating a bunch of food and was now sipping tea on the cushion, shamelessly said this. Let's wait until our bet is over. If you win, then my chef will do whatever you want him to do. The colored glaze picked up a handkerchief and wiped her mouth when she heard this, and replied in a sarcastic tone. Oh, that seems to be the case. Ha ha ha. Hee hee. Ha ha ha. Hee hee. Are these two guys here playing riddles and talking to each other? What was going on? Hearing this strange conversation, Dancing Costume showed a puzzled expression. As for the shocking bet, so far, only Ryudo and the colored glaze knew what was going on. Dancing Costume also didn't know anything about it. If Ryudo could get the colored glaze to not inherit the position of Zhai Wang in 2 years, the latter would have to marry the former and become the mistress of the Rulong group. But in order to achieve this goal, what you need to do now shouldn't be popular with your classmates, right? While drinking the tea made by Dancing Costume, the colored glaze reminded him in a casual tone. In fact, until last night, Ryudo was doing quite well on his way to achieving his goal. After he went home, he killed Sakata and quickly took the power of the Rulong group into his own hands, completing the first step of the long march. But even so, he couldn't be complacent. After all, the current Rulong group didn't deserve to have any right to speak in front of Kamiyoshi, let alone force the other party to submit. Although the Rulong group was the ruler of Kamiyoshi, to put it bluntly, they were just a mouse on the street. Based on what Ryudo had learned last night, the total number of members of the Dragon Group was about 2,000, and they were scattered around Dongjing. If it was the core members, there were almost 500 people, which was not a small number, but definitely not a large number. This organization currently controlled thousands of nightclubs in the entire Kamiyoshi and made a living by collecting protection fees and selling various illegal goods. In terms of economic situation, in fact, the economic conditions of the Rulong group were relatively good. After all, the protection fees of so many shops were not small expenses. But the problem was that even so, it was just a small income, and it was difficult to be on the big stage. After all, the real profitable underground industry, such as smuggling guns, selling powder, and other darkest jobs, the Rulong group would never touch it. Not only did the Rulong group itself not do these things, but they also strictly cracked down on the nightclubs and other places in Kamiyoshi. If they encountered trash who dared to do these things, they would beat them to death. From this point of view, the Rulong group was not like the traditional extreme way, but more like the so-called chivalry. The main task was to maintain the order on the street. But in this era, the so-called chivalry was very awkward, and it was in the gap between black and white. If you said that the Rulong group was an underground organization, he was not completely counted. After all, they did not touch the real profiteering underground industry, and they still had a bottom line. If you said that the Rulong group was a legitimate organization, then he was definitely not. He had been registered as a designated violence group. How could he be a legitimate person? To put it simply, the black thought you were too white, and the white thought you were too black. He did not please both sides, and there was no solution for both sides. So in this case, it was actually very difficult to let the Rulong group continue to grow. Ryudo must have thought about this seriously, so the answer he gave was to have a good relationship with his classmates in school first. Chapter 46. For those who haven't played games, Kyoto First High School was probably just a top high school. At most, there were some rich second-generation, officials and so on, so it wasn't surprising. But for Ryudo, who played Red Album 2, no survivors, this school was simply a demon's den. There were a lot of monsters that could affect the whole of Tokyo, Japan, and even the whole world. In addition to the three young ladies who will soon be known as the Usanjia, that is, the two female protagonists and the third female protagonist who will transfer a week later, the rest of the students are also hidden dragons and crouching tigers. For example, the second young master of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, Police Inspector, Sensible Goro. On the surface, he was a very popular third-year school hunk, but in reality, he was a cyber detective in the online world. This man could control the power of the internet like his own arm. Without leaving the house, he could solve many difficult cases that even the police couldn't solve. At the same time, because of his family background, he could completely hide his identity. There was also the first-year student who just entered the school, Masato Takayama. On the surface, he was not good with words and was not good with communication, but in reality, he was the legendary ghost of management. He never showed his face, and only relied on a mobile phone to remotely control the business of 5 listed companies at the same time. He also made the financial situation of all the companies flourish. These two god-level characters were the absolute main force of the protagonist group in the later stages of the game. They would follow the original protagonist and Colored Glaze to wage war against the Heavenly Eye group. Perhaps in the original work, it was to create a team that could influence national affairs when they were still students, which led to the creation of a bug student that didn't conform to common sense. This was actually often criticized by the player community. But in this situation where Ryudo himself transmigrated into the game world, this bug provided him with a lot of convenience. Therefore, after coming to this first high school, Goro Masayoshi, Masato Takayama, and the second female lead, Yunyin Tsukimi, were all targets that Ryudo had to establish a good relationship with. With the help of these three, the Rulon group would inevitably develop faster in the future. This way, they could achieve their goal in just 2 years. Oh, I see. That's not a bad idea. After listening to Ryudo's general description, Colored Glaze nodded, thinking that his idea wasn't completely useless. Although she didn't know what use Sensible Goro and Takayama Masahito had, she knew Yunyin, the eldest daughter of the Tsukujiri Enterprise. How to describe Yunyin? If she was willing to help Ryudo, then Ryudo would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. She was like a witch. However, the whole thing was not that simple. Hearing this, Dancing Costume immediately laughed and said, "That's a good idea. It's a pity that your identity is too bad. Other than the kind-hearted miss, I wonder how many people would be willing to interact with you?" Although Dancing Costume's words were not pleasant to hear, it was indeed the truth. Ryudo's identity was the young master of the Rulon group, leader, and he was also the second-generation leader who was about to succeed the position. In the eyes of ordinary people, except for a mad dog, there was probably no good adjectives for such an identity. Therefore, most people, except for Colored Glaze, probably didn't want to deal with Ryudo, but would avoid him. Ryudo naturally knew this, but even if he knew, he had to try. After all, there were only 2 years left, and he must quickly get the Rulon group on the right track. On the right track meant that in addition to the old way of collecting protection fees, some additional ways of making money were developed. Because in Ryudo's view, if the Rulon group continued to take this extreme Dao route, it would be difficult to have a development opportunity. People's impression of Japanese extreme Dao might be quite powerful and domineering, with big gold chains and small gold watches and 3 small barbecues a day, but this was an obvious illusion. Japanese law recognized extreme Dao as legal, but recognizing extreme Dao as legal didn't mean that they were allowed to violate the law. Even with the release of the violent group countermeasure law in Japan, extreme Dao was actually forced to the edge of the cliff. In these regulations, although the official recognized the legality of extreme Dao, there were also many strict restrictions. For example, members of the designated violent group were not allowed to open bank accounts. For example, real estate developers or housing agents could refuse and terminate the housing contract with members of the designated violent group at any time. For example, people who had too much contact with members of the designated violent group, such as eating, partying, traveling, and playing golf many times, would be blacklisted. There were many similar regulations, and the result was naturally that the sphere of influence of the designated violent group was suppressed again and again until now, it had declined to the limit. Without a bank account, they couldn't cooperate with legitimate companies, and ordinary people didn't dare to approach them to avoid being blacklisted. Such strict restrictions also led to these huge groups being completely isolated from society. Why was most of the Rulon group's activities near Kamamurachi? Because this was the only place where extreme Tao could not be discriminated against. Although Tokyo was big, there was no place for extreme Tao. This was the reality, and the reason why Kiyoshi Kazuma and Fujiki Yoshio didn't want Ryudo to join extreme Tao. Japan's Kyoto was an industry that was facing death. It was a fragile black bubble made up of a group of relatively weak people. If Kamamurachi disappeared one day in the future, then the Rulon group would also lose all their sources of income. It was that easy to destroy this organization, and it didn't cost a single soldier. In fact, the current situation of the Rulon group was explained to Ryudo by Fujiki advisor last night. But Ryudo still firmly chose to inherit this organization. This didn't mean that he liked extreme Tao so much, but because he had no other way to go now. If he wanted to use the Krypton fate-changing system, he needed a lot of money, and it was a huge amount of money in the hundreds of millions. Without the Rulon group, it was impossible for Ryudo to collect a lot of money to improve his attributes and buy items in 2 years. After all, he was just a high school student. Even if he was dreaming, he wouldn't be able to earn hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. So in any case, Ryudo must lead the Rulon group to a sustainable development, a path that could bring a lot of money and not be killed. For this, he must have the 3 bugs. 3 companions. Thinking of this, Ryudo raised his head and drank the tea in the cup, then put the cup on the mat. Thank you for the hospitality. I'll go first. Before leaving, Ryudo smiled at the colored glaze and the dancing costume and made a goodbye gesture, then walked toward the roof of the teaching building. Chapter 47. Is this guy an idiot? He knows he can't do it, but he still wants to do it. Looking at Ryudo's back, dancing costume said with a complicated tone, originally, Jidao was a group of people who were isolated by society. This Jidao young master had to build a good relationship with other people. The process must be quite difficult. He is an idiot. He knows it's impossible, but he still wants to do it. Even if he may hit his head and bleed, he won't stop. Suddenly, Colored Glaze couldn't help but think of that guy's confident expression in front of her yesterday. Young miss, forgive me for asking, but why did you smile so happily when you mentioned this? After feeling the surprised gaze of dancing costume next to her, Colored Glaze realized that she was smiling at Ryudo's back. She didn't know why, but when she knew that this man would bravely move forward for his ideals, her mood suddenly became better. I just want to laugh at him when I think of how that guy will be rejected everywhere. Is that so? But your smile is obviously not mocking. Ahem. Dancing costume, it's about time. Get ready to go back to the classroom. Before the dancer could finish her words, Luli interrupted her, which was something she rarely did. She then stood up from the cushion, put on her shoes, and left. She left in a hurry and in a sorry state, as if someone had seen through her. Not long after, the bell that signaled the beginning of the afternoon class rang throughout the entire Kyoto First High School. However, the students of Year 2 class heaved a sigh of relief before class started, because the Demon King, Ryudo Kiryu, didn't appear in the classroom. Regarding this kind of skipping class violation, the students and teachers of the second-year class remained silent, as if no one wanted to mention that name. At the same time, next to the water tank on the rooftop of the teaching building, the Demon King was lying lazily in a corner, looking as if he was just waiting for death to come. Of course, Ryudo wasn't waiting to die, he was just waiting for the bell to ring. In Ryudo's view, it was meaningless for him to go to class now. He couldn't move freely in class, so he couldn't achieve the goal of getting closer to someone. So he simply skipped class, lying on the rooftop while resting and waiting for the time to pass. Kyoto First High School had a lot of club activities, and the afternoon class was also very short. After class ended at 3:30 to 6 o'clock, it was club time. And the 3 people that Ryudo targeted as social targets were all members of the club. If he wanted to find them, he had to wait until after 3:30. Otherwise, if Longdo swaggered into someone's classroom to look for someone, maybe someone would call the police directly. That was how he was now. As for the rest of his free time, Long Do decided to consider increasing his attributes and purchasing items. After lying down for a while, Ryudo opened the Krypton Gold Fate Reversal System and looked at the situation in the system. Name: Ryudo Kiryouage, 16 attributes, Wisdom LV1, Constitution LV3, Courage LV3, Insight LV1, Charm LV1. Title: Extreme Young Master. Equipment: Black Star Pistol, Normal, Taser, Normal, Dagger, Normal, Tools, Hooligan Velcro. Total assets, $13. For 58,550, it had to be said that Long Do felt a sense of accomplishment when he saw the system display. First was the change in total assets. Originally, after Ryudo spent $500,000 to buy the Hooligan Velcro yesterday, his total assets were only $3.45 million. But because of the merit of solving the Sakata Rebellion, Ryudo was awarded the First Class Hero Award and a bonus of $10 million by the Rulon Group. Although, in fact, after confiscating Sakata's property, the unexpected wealth the organization received was calculated in hundreds of millions. But this money could not be given to Ryudo. Not to mention that he was not officially the second-generation leader. Even if he was, the amount of money he could use was not as much as he imagined. After all, most of the organization's income came from public funds. They had to pay for all the expenses, so it was impossible to spend as much as he wanted. Fortunately, with the bonus of the First Class Hero Award, Ryudo's assets became $13.45 million. He suddenly became rich again. At the same time, because the members of the Rulon Group did not have bank cards, Ryudo received stacks of cash, which were heavy in his hands. Although this did not affect the purchase of things in the Krypton Fate Reversing System, the ability of this *TTY system to collect money was definitely the best in the world. In addition to the $10 million starting capital that he just received, Ryudo also found some help provided by the system, such as the use of the equipment bar. Whoosh! As he quickly raised his hand, a pitch-black Black Star pistol appeared in his palm. The whole process was like magic. According to Ryudo's exploration last night, a total of 3 items could be stored in the equipment bar. After storing them, they could be taken out at any time. For example, the dagger that he suddenly pulled out and asked the dancing costume to cut her finger not long ago seemed to be hidden in his sleeve, but in fact, it was taken out from this storage space. Otherwise, if he really hid the dagger in his sleeve, he might accidentally fall down and end up in a Final Destination type of tragedy. If that happened, then this $1 million would be too much of a waste. As for the other shops, they were still the same. There were a lot of awesome items in them, but unfortunately, he did not know what to buy for the time being. In order to keep an eye on the pitiful amount of funds he had, Ryudo decided to wait until he needed to buy something, so as to not leave it there to collect dust. This can be used? Just as Ryudo finished looking at the attributes and shop, he suddenly found that the title column seemed to have some changes. Previously, this area was a gray area, and clicking on it did not have any effect, but now it became white, and after clicking on it, a second page appeared. After clicking on this page, a title overview interface appeared, and the interface showed that there were 2 titles that could be equipped. Title 1, Extreme Young Master. Title 2, Desperado. This title is not bad. Speaking of which, there is a way to obtain a title through this method. After seeing the sudden appearance of the second title, Ryudo was suddenly overjoyed. Chapter 48. Things like titles were somewhat useless in Ryudo's eyes. After all, the only title he had, Extreme Young Master, was a double-edged sword. Although it increased courage, it decreased charm. Ryudo was born with LV2 courage. Excellent passerby. Increasing 1 level of courage didn't mean much, but dropping 1 level of charm was terrible. After taking off this title and changing it to Desperado, Ryudo's attributes changed. The original LV3 courage. Professional expert became LV2 courage. Excellent passerby. The original LV1 charm. Worldly scum became LV2 charm. Excellent passerby. Like I said, this is the attribute that I should have. Seeing that his charm returned to normal, Ryudo's face showed a happy smile. The new Desperado title was useful, but it only saved him 200,000 every time he died. Compared to the title that increased attributes, it was worlds apart. But the good thing about this title was that it didn't have any side effects. Even if it was a blank title, it was better than the Extreme Young Master title that had negative effects. After all, Ryudo Kiryu was originally quite handsome, and his temperament after rebirth wasn't as bad as before. If this kind of handsome guy was still called worldly scum, it would be too disgusting. So, originally, Ryudo's charm should be at the level of innate level 2, but because of the title reduction, it was suppressed to the level of scum. The difference between innate level 2 and innate level 1 was not small. Innate level 2 only needed to add 3 attributes to max it out. The cost was 5 million, 50 million, 500 million. Innate level 1 needed to add 4 attributes to max it out. The cost was 5 million, 50 million, 500 million, 5 billion. So, innate level 1 and innate level 2, this was a difference of 10 times the cost. The final level was a difference of 5 billion yen. It was a headache just thinking about it. Although level 2 charm was quite good, in Ryudo's eyes, it was far from enough. Very good, if that's the case, then let's continue. I'll soar into the sky. Under Ryudo's shouts that resounded through the rooftop, he suddenly clicked on the plus symbol next to the charm attribute. Upgrading from LV2 charm to LV3 charm requires 5 million renminbi. Confirm payment? Of course. The moment he reached out and tapped on the word confirm, Ryudo was valiant and high-spirited, as if he had returned to being a land immortal. Along with the faint light, Ryudo's attributes changed again. As it turned out, the improvement from LV2, excellent passerby, to LV3, professional expert, was quite huge. Although his face was still the same, and he was still the same person, the effect of the increase in charm was immediate. When Ryudo went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, he was pleasantly surprised to find that the face in the mirror had become more pleasing to the eye. The originally very cheap and low-quality dyed yellow fur looked like the golden fur of a super scion. The ferocious eyebrows exuded a unique masculine aura. The originally handsome facial features became even more perfect, enough to captivate thousands of girls. Of course, Ryudo's appearance did not change. Only the feeling he gave people changed. The attribute charm. Sometimes it was difficult to simply use handsome or beautiful to describe it. This was a rather complicated feeling, one that went beyond superficial external things like handsomeness and beauty. This feeling was not so obvious when looking at the portrait in the game, but if changed to the real world, it was a lot more obvious. Good lord. This is the charm of a professional expert. It can actually bring such a powerful affinity effect. After continuously jumping from LV1 to LV3, Ryudo finally understood how strong this attribute was. If he entered the school with this LV3 charm attribute, the result would definitely not be the kind of scene where people would avoid him. After all, this level of charm had already reached the level of a celebrity. It belonged to a true professional, the kind that had their own halo. No matter what they did, there would be people helping them unconditionally. Of course, the power of charm was not limited to this. The higher it went, the more terrifying it would become. Originally, in this game, there were 2 girls with the most powerful personal halo. They were the peak of the charm attribute. They had the LV5 charm, extreme Superman level of monsters. One of them was the big boss Tenmu Iam. That girl's charm was so high that one look at her could make people want to hang themselves for her. Together with the same level of wisdom, she could even casually brainwash people for fun. She was simply an inhuman monster. And the second one was the game's second female lead that Ryudo was going to meet not long later, Yunyin Tsukimi. Although Yunyin wasn't as demonic as Yongji, she was also naturally brimming with charm. As long as that big miss opened her mouth, the entire school would do anything for her without any complaints. So now, although Ryudo's LV3 charm was enough to deal with normal people, in front of Yunyin, there was probably no way to fight back. It was better to leave her for last. Just like this, Ryudo was immersed in his charm while waiting for the time to pass. Ring, 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 ring. 2 hours later, the bell that represented the arrival of the afternoon class rang throughout the school. The students of each grade also left the classroom with smiles on their faces as they walked toward their respective activity departments. Although Dori First High was a top high school, there were still many activities inside. Football department, basketball department, choir department, biology department, portrait department, archery department, light music department, drama department, boxing department. He read them all out like he was reading the names of dishes. Okay, let's go. At this time, Ryudo, who was standing on the rooftop of the teaching building, stretched and walked towards his first destination. In the short term, Ryudo's goal was still to find some reliable companions. And the person he chose as his first companion was the school hunk of the healing faculty, Sensible Goro, who was currently studying in Class 3A. When Ryudo arrived at Sensible Goro's basketball department, he just happened to see a figure who was shooting a beautiful three-pointer amidst the screams of many female students. Just like the portrait in the game, Sensible Goro was a very handsome man. His appearance was handsome but not feminine, and his muscles were just right, not bulging, not making people feel that he was thin. Coupled with the gentle smile that always hung on his face, it was no wonder that he was always surrounded by many admirers. However, Ryudo knew this guy's big secret, and until now, no one in this world knew this secret. And this big secret was that this handsome healer, the school hunk who was adored by thousands of girls, was actually an incurable Chinibu patient. Chapter 49. From a long time ago, Sensible Goro became aware of a very important fact. I, Sensible Goro, am not an ordinary person, but the legendary detective, the reincarnation of Sherlock Holmes. My left eye sees through everything in the world. My right eye sees through the mysteries of the mortal world. Mortals are ignorant. They will only marvel at my handsome appearance that is like that of the sun god, but they will not be able to see my most precious essence. As a result, today's Koji Goro was also fighting with those sinful beasts. Figures flashed in front of his eyes. The group of sinful beasts tried to take the core of truth from the great detective's hands. But how is that possible? Sensible dodged and moved forward with a charming smile at the corner of his mouth. I am the greatest detective, Sherlock Holmes too. Back off, beasts. After Sensible dodged the beasts, he suddenly jumped up, and the core of truth in his hand cut through the sky. It completely tore apart the grid made of sin. Good shot. A three-pointer. Sir Sensible is amazing. Just as Mingji landed on the ground, the group of girls surrounding the basketball court let out joyful shouts. If it was someone else, they would be very happy to get the support of so many young girls. Ha ha ha, thank you for your support, thank you very much. After landing on the ground, Mingji waved at the group of female fans in a friendly manner. The smile on his face was still as perfect as ever. However, no one noticed that there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. Boredom, ignorance, and pointlessness. These are the attitudes that the insignificant people around me should have. Whenever Sensible was surrounded by this group of fans and shouted around him, he had the idea of taking out a crutch and hitting each of them on the head. This world was not interesting for Sensible. After all, he knew that he was a hopeless patient with Chinibu syndrome. That's right, he was a Chinibu. Wise was well aware of this. But so what? I think, therefore I am. What I think exists, exists. I am Holmes II, and Holmes II is me. No matter what, this thought had always been incomparably firm in his heart. But in reality, Sensible didn't dare to reveal his romantic side to the people around him because he was burdened with the expectations of his family. Wulong, as a member of the Sensible family, you must become a man who can shoulder everyone's expectations. Do you understand? Ever since he was very young, his father, who was the chief police officer, had been reminding him like this. My true self is a serious Chinibu. Therefore, such a person would not be accepted by this society. Sensible naturally knew this very well. He could be the proud son of the chief of police, the most popular guy in school, the rising star of the basketball club, but he couldn't be Sherlock Holmes II. Therefore, Sensible could only retrieve himself on the internet. As long as he turned on the computer and picked up the keyboard, he was the omnipotent cyber detective Sherlock Holmes II. In the real world, he could only play the role of a clown who was responsible for making people laugh. It doesn't matter. Anyway, no one understands my world. I'll just muddle along like this. With this sense of decadence, Sensible picked up the basketball and dribbled all the way. He wanted to end this round of confrontation with a handsome three-step layup. Yeah. But at this moment, there was a sudden exclamation from the female fans watching from the side. This was obviously not because of the upcoming handsome scene, but because of an unexpected incident. What? Before Sensible could react, a figure in a school uniform suddenly appeared in the air in front of him. The people who played basketball in the basketball club would never wear a school uniform. Then this guy who suddenly appeared is Pa, following a crisp sound. The man who suddenly appeared stretched out his hand in midair and easily swatted the ball that Mingji had just let go of. Block. This was the term generally used to describe what just happened on the basketball court. However, the person who did this was not any of the 10 players on the court, but a young man who should not be on the court. At this moment, everyone inside and outside the court was stunned. After all, they have played basketball for so many years, and it was the first time they encountered a scene where a spectator suddenly became interested and ran to the court to block a player's shot. Of course, in addition to the shock, some slightly knowledgeable people were also shocked by the figure's action because the guy really jumped too high. His feet seemed to have hit a spring as he easily jumped into the air and slapped the ball away. His palm even reached the height of the basket. This is a high school. How many high school students can jump so high? It's not like they are playing a slam dunk master. But no matter what, this kind of behavior of rushing into the field without saying a word to outsiders was obviously condemnable. Thus, a third-year senior from the basketball department angrily reached out to grab that person's arm and shouted, "Hey, what do you want to do?" He originally wanted to angrily rebuke, but in the next moment, the person turned his head. The signature dyed blonde hair, the signature ruffian handsomeness, the signature fierce eyebrows. Without a doubt, this uninvited guest was the man who created the miracle of Moses parting the sea at the school gate this morning, Ryudo Kiryu. When he realized that the person he grabbed was actually Ryudo, the basketball club senior suddenly opened his mouth and the second half of his sentence was abruptly stopped. This, Ryudo Kiryu? Why is he here? What does he want to do? When everyone saw the person who rushed onto the court, they all had an expression of disbelief. Everyone knew that Ryudo Kiryu was definitely not a member of the basketball club. He couldn't even be a member of any activity club because the moment he joined a club, that club would be dissolved on the spot. But since they knew that the intruder was Ryudo Kiryu, no one dared to say anything to him. After all, according to the rumors, this man single-handedly defeated thousands of fully armed elites last night. He was a demon king with countless blood on his hands. But at this time, Sensible could clearly feel Ryudo's gaze. This guy is coming for me? Why is he coming for me? Did I offend him? The next moment, when Ryudo slowly walked towards Sensible, everyone around could not help but hold their breath. They did not even dare to breathe. Some of the more timid ones were even prepared to call the police. However, when the distance between the two of them was less than a meter, Long Do stuck his head out slightly. He used a mocking tone and said, "I didn't expect that a famous detective would play the role of a clown here. I'm extremely disappointed, my dear Sherlock Holmes too." Chapter 50. The distance between the two was extremely close, and Ryudo's voice wasn't very loud, so only Sensible could hear this sentence. Suddenly, his slightly numb gaze suddenly underwent a drastic change, as if he heard something that could change his worldview. How is this possible? Did he just call me Sherlock Holmes II? This title has only existed in Sensible's mind so far. He has never told anyone about his fantasy world. Even when he was an online detective, Sensible only used cyber detective as a pseudonym. He didn't dare to add the name of Sherlock Holmes for fear of profaning the sacred realm in his heart. Therefore, this was the first time in Sensible's life that he heard this word from someone else's mouth, and it was said to him. For the first time, Sensible asked in a somewhat sluggish tone, You are?" Ryudo didn't answer his question, but instead, he picked up the basketball from the ground. "Let's have a one-on-one, Sensible Goro." He picked up the basketball and let it hover in his hand, then said with a smile, "One-on-one? Basketball? Before the end of 3 rounds, you can ask me any questions to guess my identity. If you can guess it, I will tell you everything. Otherwise, I will never appear in front of you again." On the basketball court surrounded by dozens of people, Ryudo challenged Sensible. 3 rounds, no problem. After looking at the unfamiliar face that he had seen a few times, he wisely nodded his head. Logically, he shouldn't respond to such a strange request. But Sensible was extremely curious about Ryudo's true identity and how he knew his true identity. Therefore, under Sensible's persuasion, the other members of the basketball department also retreated to the side and left the court to the 2 strange people. Sensible Goro and Ryudo Kiryu. The 2 of them actually wanted to have a one-on-one. Basketball? No, basketball was only a superficial dimension that ordinary people could see. In reality, the battle between the 2 of them was on another level. As Sensible took the ball to attack first, a huge British-style city appeared in front of his eyes. At this time, the basketball in his hand seemed to have become a crutch, and the jersey on his body had become a detective's uniform. With a pipe in his mouth, he walked through the streets and alleys. A mystery was looming before Holmes too, and he had never been so eager to solve it. Accordingly, Judicious moved his leather-shod feet swiftly forward and stepped upon the cobblestone street. A dark figure appeared in an alley not far away. The dark figure smiled and said, "Sherlock Holmes too, ask away. What's the first question?" "You're Ryudo Kiryu, but you're also not Ryudo Kiryu. You're like me, the reincarnation of some important person?" Sensible's voice was very low, obviously not wanting the surrounding crowd to hear. "That's right, score." Swish. With a clear sound, Sensible's basketball smoothly entered the net. What a hollow ball. In the second round, Ryudo held the ball, and the air around the alley became strange. But even so, Sensible continued to ask, "You and I exist in the same era. You're proficient in various criminal techniques, the head of the world's criminal organization, and like to trample on the law. Your name is James Moriarty, right?" When a reincarnated person who knew his true identity appeared, Sensible quickly thought of this name. There was no doubt that Ryudo's true identity was related to him. There were not many characters related to Sherlock Holmes, and even fewer with such obvious evil aura. And James Moriarty, also known as Professor Moriarty, was the #1 enemy of the great detective, Sherlock Holmes. This inference was reasonable. However, the dark figure shook his head and smiled. "I do exist in the same era as you. I'm a romantic individualist, and I occasionally cross the boundary of the law. But I only act against the rich and corrupt upper class. Don't confuse me with Moriarty." Boom. At the same time, in the real world, Ryudo leaped into the air and smashed the ball directly into the basket with his right hand. A one-handed tomahawk dunk? What kind of monster is this? Seeing Ryudo slam Sensible away as if he had eaten spinach, the surrounding basketball team members were numb. They just wanted to kneel down and shout, "Sakuraji Hanamichi, please stop your magic." In fact, from the way Ryudo dribbled the ball, it could be seen that this guy was a complete layman. He did not have any skills. But it did not matter. He had the physical ability of level 3 physique, professional expert. With this physical fitness, dunking a basketball was 100 times easier than shooting a ball. As Sensible picked up the ball again, the third round of the final round began. However, this Sherlock Holmes II seemed to be trapped in a fog and did not dare to take a step forward. Who is it? Someone from the same era as Sherlock Holmes, a romantic individualist with a hobby of attacking the upper class. In fact, the information given by the dark figure was not little. It was enough for Sensible to make a certain degree of analysis and inference. But after all, there was only 1 round left. If he answered wrong, Sensible would be completely defeated, so he could not rush for results. From the previous description, Ryudo's true identity seemed to be both good and evil, and was in the middle of a moral gap. He was neither a good person nor a bad person in the traditional sense. He would only make a move against the rich and heartless, decaying upper echelons, as if he was committed to building this world into his own ideal. If there was a strong enemy in front of him, even if it was an unshakable existence, this person would use all kinds of methods to pry it away. There was no doubt that from the perspective of the entire society, he was an evil character. But this person was evil, charming, and also very principled. It seemed that he liked beautiful women. Could it be? It's him? Just as the dark figure was about to attack him, a familiar name suddenly flashed in Sensible's mind. At the last moment, he jumped up and threw the core of truth in his hand into the basket that represented the truth. At the same time, Sensible shouted the name that represented Ryudo's true identity. "You are the strange thief gentleman Yasin Robin." The ball went in. As the core of truth fell into the basket, Sensible's last shout that resounded throughout the stadium also reached everyone's ears. "Smart, correct, my dear Sherlock Holmes II." Under the confused gaze of the crowd, Ryudo smiled and took off a non-existent hat from his head. He did a dashing hat salute to Sherlock Holmes in the illusory world. Chapter 51. Ryuto Kiryu, the future second-generation leader of the Rulon Group. What exactly do you want to discuss with me? Not long after, when Ryudo and Sensible came to a corner of the school where no one was around, the latter put his hands in his pockets and asked in an expectant tone. Without a doubt, Sensible was looking forward to what Ryudo could say that would motivate him and break this silent world. But of course, Ryudo didn't disappoint and directly told him his goal. Kamiyoshi and Tenmu Group, you should know what these two names mean. Of course I know. The behemoth that rules both the black and the white. Sensible's most outstanding point was his insight and intelligence-gathering ability. Plus, the sea of the internet gave the young detective enough space to explore, so he naturally knew much more than ordinary people. Kamiyoshi, needless to say, as a large family that assisted the Shinto religion, they had a complicated relationship with the emperor and had great political influence. This family was not only the emperor's relative in the true sense, but they also had the privilege of being a god. In fact, whether it was politicians, the self-defense forces, or the police, they all had to listen to their orders, or they could be eliminated for disrespecting the gods. This kind of thing happened from time to time in history, and the Tenmu Group was a mega-corporation that rose a few decades ago. On the surface, they provided security, banking, and legal services for corporate giants, but in reality, they were merchants of death who sold weapons. As a military giant, they could be seen in the military conflicts of various continents. With the latest development of technology and the endless support of the company's inorganic capital, the tentacles of this dark military empire had already extended to every corner of Nippon. From the information Ming-Ji had gathered, these two behemoths were truly existences that could cover the sky with one hand. As long as one lived in this island country, it was impossible to be their enemy, just like no one would be the enemy of the sky above their head. But Ryudo said casually, "I want to deal with them." It was a simple sentence, but it was so moving. Deal with them. Deal with this decaying country. Deal with the darkness that shrouded the city. Sensible had thought of doing this countless times before, but he didn't dare. That's right, Sensible didn't dare. He was terrified. After knowing how deep the darkness of this country was, he chose to escape. But at this time, Ryudo stood in front of this deserter and openly stated his goal. From Longdo's point of view, he had no choice but to do so. Tenmu Group didn't want him to live, and Kamiyoshi wanted him to stay away from his love. Could he not to fight in this situation? If he didn't fight, then there would be nothing left. But from Sensible's perspective, this extreme Dao young master was like a determined revolutionary, fighting for his ideals and for the world. Unknowingly, Ryudo seemed to grow a pair of wings behind him, and an angel-like halo appeared on his head. Of course, there was no such thing. Sensible's Chinibu disease was causing hallucinations. After taking a deep breath, Sensible asked seriously, "It's easy to say. What do you plan to do?" "I'll develop my Ryu group into a sufficiently large organization. Then, I'll take advantage of the situation between the Kanzaki family and the Tenmu Group and lure them into war so that I can benefit from it." Ryudo answered quickly, because this was the answer he had thought of long ago. After all, he was very clear about what would happen in this world in the future. He didn't even need to lure them. Next, these two groups would experience a series of open and hidden struggles. When the sandpiper and the clam fight, the fisherman benefits. With Ryudo's understanding of the two forces and the future world, he could let the Rulon Group deal with the two sides while constantly strengthening himself. When the war between the two behemoths reached its peak 2 years later, The Rulon group could directly backstab the two forces and directly destroy them at the same time. But the premise of this was that the fishermen also had to have the strength to kill the enemy. In order to achieve this goal, I need your help, Holmes too. After explaining the general plan to Sensible, Ryudo generously extended his hand. Crazy, what a crazy man. Hearing that, Mingji sighed. Then, he held that hand. Indeed, Ryudo was a madman, but Sensible was no better. There was a fire in his heart, a fire that wanted to light up the darkness. This fire was on the verge of extinguishing, but because of today's sudden invitation, it was reignited. In this way, the future famous detective Sensible Goro became Ryudo's partner and a torch for him to fight against the darkness. After both sides understood each other's meaning, the following conversation was easier to unfold. Ryudo, in fact, as the future second generation of the Rulon group, I can understand why you want to deal with the officials, but where did the Heavenly Eye group come from? Not long ago, the Heavenly Eye group planted a mole around me. They wanted to take over the Rulon group after getting rid of me. I suspect that my father's imprisonment was also their doing. I see. In recent years, there have been strange changes of leaders within many extreme groups. Could it be that the Heavenly Eye group is also behind it? It's possible. If that's the case, those guys' hands are too long. It feels like they're everywhere. Indeed, it's not impossible for them to throw a few mercenaries from the sky and kill the two of us directly. Ha ha ha, this is really impossible. Of course, this is the Dory number 1 high school. I'm just joking. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Before Sensible smiled and said, I'm just joking, how can I work in the school? A gust of wind had already rolled up in the sky. When Ryudo and Sensible looked up with an unbelievable expression, they saw a white helicopter suddenly flew out from behind the wall not far away. It wasn't a joke, nor was it Sensible's illusion, but a real helicopter. Moreover, there was a huge eye pattern on the side of the helicopter. Behind the eye pattern, there was a map of the Earth as if indicating that this Heavenly Eye was monitoring every movement in the world. The most terrifying thing was that the cabin door of the helicopter had slowly opened, and a few men in green mercenary clothes also revealed their bodies from there. Chapter 52. No, it can't be that strange, right? Sensible has a crow's mouth attribute? When the Augusta Westland AW-101 helicopter quickly flew in their direction, Ryudo couldn't help but have goosebumps. What a joke. This is Yodo, inside the first high school in the bustling area. How is it possible for someone to fly a helicopter into the school so brazenly? Did they apply for the flight route? What are the flight management and law enforcement doing? However, compared to the helicopter that really appeared, what made Ryudo's scalp tingle was the 3 men standing at the cabin door ready to jump at any time. The 3 of them were all wearing emerald green field suits, and they didn't carry anything on their back. They looked like they were going to come out with light equipment. But when the helicopter just descended to a height of about 100 meters, they didn't hesitate to jump down. They landed in the direction of Ryudo and Sensible. It's impossible to deploy a parachute at this height. They are doing. It's okay. Just when Ryudo was wondering if the 3 of them were going to perform a suicide show, he saw that the 3 of them were holding a rapid descent rope made of unknown material. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With the help of the rope, the 3 of them successfully crossed the height of 100 meters in the blink of an eye. They landed in a triangle around Ryudo and Sensible and directly surrounded them. After landing on the ground, Ryudo could see the appearance of the 3 people. The tough face with various scars visible to the naked eye. The sturdy and flexible body was filled with a calm temperament that could only be cultivated after experiencing the battlefield. There was no doubt that the 3 guys in field suits weren't military fans or field combat enthusiasts, but mercenaries that returned from somewhere. It's Tenmu I am. That woman is planning to make a move on me so soon? And it's in the school? In an instant, only such a curse-like name appeared in Ryudo's mind. In the entire Tokyo, the only force that could so brazenly mobilize helicopters and mercenaries to Dori First High School was probably the Heavenly Eye Group. They had all kinds of special channels and means, and they could carry out some very exaggerated battle plans within the city without restraint. Even the government couldn't do anything about them. In fact, Ryudo expected that Iam would find trouble with him. After all, he completely destroyed Iam's plan the night before yesterday. Last night, he also cleared out Iam's pawns in the Rulon group. After this, Iam's plan to control the Rulon group was completely ruined. It would be strange if she didn't find trouble with him. That was why Longdo wanted to rope in his team as soon as possible, especially Mingji, who was proficient in network hacking, so that Mingji could monitor the Heavenly Eye Group's actions from all aspects. But it was too fast. It was really too fast. Ryuto just pulled Sensible into the team, and the people sent by Iam had already arrived? That bastard didn't even bother to wait for him to leave the school for a few hours. Even if she was impatient, she shouldn't be this impatient. Suddenly, behind the three mercenaries, Ryudo seemed to be able to see an impatient face. Indeed, Tenmu Iam was known for her impatience. She once had a glorious history where she clearly arranged a meticulous murder plan, but because she suddenly felt bored, she directly threw a bomb to blow up the target and the entire building. This kind of impatience and freewheeling personality made her behavior unpredictable. Facing her was like facing an alien creature in human skin. However, just as Ryudo and Sensible stood back to back, nervously watching the three mercenaries, one of the oldest mercenaries slowly opened his mouth. He said in a stiff tone, "Ryudo Kiryu, my master invites you to come with us." The mercenary's tone was stiff, and the meaning behind his words was also stiff, leaving no room for negotiation. Although he said please, in reality, he meant come with me. As expected of Tenmu Iam. So that's how it is. She doesn't intend to kill me here, but wants to bring me to the unrestrained Sky Tower and use some methods to kill me? After understanding that these three mercenaries were ordered by Iam to bring him back, Ryudo understood Iam's meaning. The unrestrained Sky Tower was the headquarters of the Tenmu group and also the home of Tenmu Iam, who was the commander. The reason for this name was that the Tenmu clan was the black-blooded successor of the legendary demon king of the Sixth Heaven, Oda Nobunaga. They were the descendants of the true demon king. In Buddhism, the Sixth Heaven was also known as the unrestrained sky. The heavens seized what he had transformed into for its own entertainment. Simply put, it was seizing other people's things for its own entertainment. It belonged to the most vile world of desires. Tenmu was similar to demon. As a descendant of the black-blooded successor of the demon king, Tenmu Iam possessed malice far beyond human imagination. She loved to watch the miserable struggles of humans before they died. Under such circumstances, Longdo was well aware of the consequences if he was brought to the unfettered Sky Tower. He might as well just die and be done with it. Thinking of this, Ryudo decided to give it a try. Rather than being captured by Iam as a toy, he might as well try to break out of the encirclement. After preparing himself, Ryudo quietly reached his hand into his pocket, preparing to pull out a pistol from his equipment slot. He observed carefully, perhaps because they were on a mission in the school, the three mercenaries did not carry any firearms. As long as he could pull out a pistol, he should be able to fight. But obviously, the quality of a professional was not something Ryudo could compare to. Even though it was a slight movement, it did not escape the eyes of the three battle-hardened mercenaries. Almost in the blink of an eye, the mercenary closest to Ryudo made his move. With a speed that did not match his tall and burly physique, he sprinted towards Ryudo with a speed comparable to a 100m sprinter. He reached out his hand and pressed it against Ryudo's hand. So fast, Ryudo was shocked and quickly tried to retreat, but another pair of ghostly arms had already grabbed his arm and pinned it behind his back. The close combat skills of a mercenary were not flashy, but effective. Almost in the blink of an eye, Ryudo felt pain in his arms, as if a few of his joints were about to be broken. Chapter 53. Good heavens! Is this the true meaning of a professional? Just as his hands were tied behind his back, Ryudo couldn't make any effective resistance. Even if his physical fitness reached the level of a professional, his experience and skills were worlds apart from this group of mercenaries. Seeing that Ryudo was caught, Sensible on the side also squatted down and put on a look of not resisting. His actions at this time were undoubtedly correct. After all, The only target that I am invited was Ryuto. So if Sensible made even half an offensive move at this time, his neck would be snapped in the next moment. Whoosh! When Ryuto was held down, a rope ladder was immediately thrown down from the helicopter suspended in the sky. One of the mercenaries quickly tied Ryuto with a rope, carried him on his shoulder, and then climbed up the rope ladder. As for the other two mercenaries, they didn't even look at Mingji before they left. The meaning behind their actions was self-evident. Arrogance, absolute arrogance. Sensible was clearly a witness of this kidnapping, but the kidnappers didn't even bother to kill him, because they didn't receive instructions to eliminate the witnesses, and in Iam's view, there was no need to do so. Are you kidding me? I already sent a helicopter to the high school to kidnap people in broad daylight. Why would I care about a few witnesses? If you want to report to the police or the authorities, go ahead. It's meaningless anyway. After all, on this island, the Heavenly Eye Group was the uncrowned emperor. A mere police force was not even a dog in their eyes. There was no need to be afraid. Rumble, rumble, rumble. When Mingji saw the helicopter flying off into the distance, he was dumbfounded. From the appearance of the helicopter to Ryuto being taken away, the whole process passed at most 2 minutes. It was so fast that it was impossible to guard against, and there was no way to make any rational response. Damn, Ryuto, don't let anything happen to you. After clenching his teeth, Sensible quickly ran in the direction of the school gate. He knew that calling the police was meaningless, so Sensible wouldn't do such a stupid thing. However, as a cyber detective on the internet, all he could do was use his own network technology to think of ways to provide some help to Longdo. In addition, he had to immediately contact the Rulon group and let them know that their young master was now in a desperate situation. Yes, in a desperate situation. Ryuto has always been in a desperate situation. Ryuto has always been in a desperate situation. In these short few days, he even got used to this feeling. However, probably because his courage level had dropped, when he was pulled onto the helicopter, Longdo couldn't help but feel agitated, and he couldn't think too carefully. So this is how the courage attribute is used. The moment he reacted, Ryuto immediately opened the system page and changed the title back to the original Extreme Young Master. As his courage attribute once again rose to LV3 Courage, Professional Expert, the influence of the murderous atmosphere in the surroundings suddenly disappeared. Phew, finally completely relaxed. The enhancement effect of courage could be said to be immediate. The narrow interior of the helicopter was as intimate as the toilet at home in the eyes of the dragon head. But even so, the current situation was not ordinary. There were a total of 4 mercenaries sitting in the internal cabin of the Augusta Westland AW-101. Including the pilot, there were a total of 5 people present. Although this group of people didn't say a word after boarding the plane, Longdo could feel the seriousness and vigilance in their hearts. Since they were arranged by Tenmu Iam to carry out the secret mission of kidnapping Ryuto, then these people should be Iam's direct subordinates, members of Combat Under the Heavens. In the game, Combat Under the Heavens was an elite army composed of 300 people. Almost all of the members came from the Middle East battlefield. They were all ruthless characters who crawled out from piles of corpses. With Ryuto's current strength, it was impossible to escape from the hands of Combat Under the Heavens. It was simply suicide. But if he was brought into the unrestrained Sky Tower, then there was a high probability that he would be met with a dead end. From a certain point of view, when Ryuto was dragged into the helicopter, his fate was already sealed. But even so, Ryuto was not discouraged because he was not afraid of death. After previously increasing his charm attribute, Ryuto's little treasury had about 8.45 million inch left. In other words, if the Dragon Sage did not intend to buy any items, this money would be enough for him to revive 8 times, giving him 8 chances to deal with this disaster. So now, the first thing to do was to observe, no matter the slightest clue or clue. Only by observing carefully enough could Ryuto find a ray of hope in this hopeless situation. In addition, he also had to see if there were any useful and cheap items to buy in the system's Krypton shopping mall. So, when the helicopter flew towards the unrestrained Sky Tower, Ryuto quietly observed the situation of the mercenaries while constantly rummaging through the system's shopping mall. There were many things in the Krypton shopping mall, But considering the issue of cost-effectiveness, Ryudo could only look at some of the useful items and drool. For example, the rogue flying needle, which was very similar to Detective Conan's watch, could shoot an undetectable flying needle to knock out a person. It was a must-have item for killing people at home and traveling. Unfortunately, this flying needle required 1 million yen. It was so expensive that people couldn't bear to buy it. And in the face of so many enemies, knocking out one of them was not very meaningful. It was not as useful as the pistol in the equipment column. As for the other items, they were either useful but too expensive to buy, or cheap but useless. Ryudo was very confused. Wait, this is... Just as Ryudo was looking through the shopping mall page by page, he suddenly saw something similar to a contact lens. Item: Rogue Analysis Lens. Uses: a wonderful lens that can see the physical attributes of others, but not their clothes. It can be said to be a gentleman's item. See the physical attributes of others? Could it be that through this lens, he could know the attribute level of others? When he saw this description, Ryudo was suddenly interested. After all, in this situation, if he could see the attributes of others, it would be of great help to Ryudo. Chapter 54. Intellect, Physique, Courage, Insight, Charm. These 5 attributes basically contain the strength of a human's ability in all aspects. Through the system, Ryudo could see his own attributes, but there was no way to see the attributes of others. Even in the original game, Red Album 2, No Survivors, there was no interface for the character's attributes. So until now, Ryudo could only use the information available in the game to judge the upper and lower limits of other people's abilities. But this kind of shallow judgment was definitely not as effective as the Rogue Analysis Lens. If he could know the attributes of everyone around Ryudo, then he could infer a lot of things. For example, if a person wearing ordinary clothes walked towards him, but this guy's physique reached the level of a professional, then it was very likely that this person was an assassin who wanted to harm Ryudo. For example, if a seemingly honest person had extremely high intellect, then it was not difficult to determine that this person was actually a scheming person. For example, when dealing with a person with extremely high insight level, he had to pay attention to his words and actions to prevent him from seeing through his inner thoughts. In short, being able to see other people's attributes could provide considerable convenience in many aspects. It could allow Ryudo to make the correct judgment of a person in the fastest time. So this Rogue Analysis Lens was definitely a very useful tool, but the price was actually 1 million. It was quite shocking. But even so, Ryudo quickly clicked on the purchase and put this tool into his inventory. After all, in his opinion, this tool could be said to be extremely cost-effective. Even if he used his life to exchange for it, it was still quite worth it. The moment he clicked on the purchase, a small transparent glass piece appeared in Ryudo's eye. Perhaps it was because his hands were tied up, but this time, the system was very considerate and helped Longdo equip the items where they should be. Zung. The moment the Rogue Analysis Lens was put on his left eye, a familiar attribute list popped up beside the mercenary in front of Ryudo. Name: Andre Patou. Age: 38. Attributes: Intelligence LV2, Constitution LV3, Courage LV3, Insight LV3, Charm LV1. This name. It sounded like a Russian name. As expected of an active mercenary, his overall attributes were really high. The mercenary that Ryudo was looking at, other than his charm being a bit pitiful, the other 4 attributes were very good. It could be said that he was a very good professional. He immediately turned to look at the other 3 players and found that they were from different countries, and their attributes were quite good. So that's how it is. This Hooligan's Analytical Mirror can see one's name, age, and 5 stats, but nothing else. Although there wasn't a lot of information, it was still quite useful. After all, everyone's true identity and true ability could not be hidden from the eyes of this Rogue Analysis Mirror. Who are you? Is there something wrong with your brain? Was his body strong? Was he brave enough? Was he observant? Was she charming? With just a glance, all the information was in Ryudo's eyes. It was like alien technology. Just as Ryudo was feeling excited about getting a new toy, the plane slowly began to descend. Rumble, rumble, with a deep roar, the plane landed smoothly. Ryudo was also led out of the cabin by the mercenaries. After leaving the cabin, the first thing that came into view was a huge bay, and many towering buildings could be seen in the distance. Surrounded by the sea view of Tokyo could be seen in the distance. Such a scene could only be seen in the center of Tokyo Bay. That's right, the headquarters of the Heavenly Eye Group, the Heavenly Eye Tower, was built on the artificial island in the middle of Tokyo Bay. The design of the Heavenly Eye Tower was a rather strange, abstract style. The main body was gradually connected by 6 building parts, and the shape that kept spiraling upward was even more straight to the sky. With a height of 666 meters, it looked like some kind of religious base. Of course, it was indeed some kind of religious base, but the god it worshipped was the legendary demon king of the 6th heaven, Oda Nobunaga. After leaving the helicopter, Ryuto was brought inside from the helipad of the tower. After walking through several long corridors, they came to a spacious study. The study was extremely spacious, and the decoration style inside was also very chaotic. The moment he entered, he didn't know where to start complaining. Ink watercolors hung on the walls, and the solemn European-style bookshelf was filled with various figurines with heads broken. There was a huge Doraemon engraved on the dark desk, and the gorgeous carpet had been sprayed all over by someone with spray paint. This was a typical example of how a patient with schizophrenia would ruin their room after they had money. Anyone who stepped into this study should know that the person they were dealing with was definitely not a normal person. But what was different from the style of this insane study was that the appearance of Eheim Amateur did not give off the feeling of a crazy person. In fact, Timuayam was a great beauty. If she chose to debut on the spot, she would have more than 1 billion fans tomorrow. When Ryudo came to the study, the tall figure was standing in front of the innermost floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the calm sea in the distance. Just the sight of her back was enough to drive men crazy. It was hard to imagine what kind of shock such a woman would bring when she turned around. However, in the next second, the woman turned her head and glanced at the distinguished guest she had invited with her pair of the most special eyes in the world. At that moment, Ryudo felt like he was in an abyss, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. A natural fear like a mouse seeing a cat quickly spread through his body, and he couldn't even move a finger. Timuayam was very beautiful. She was indeed very beautiful. Her eyebrows were picturesque, and her dimples were like jade. Her facial features were as exquisite as if they had been measured inch by inch with a ruler. Her figure had the golden ratio, and her shiny black hair was slightly curled. It was tied into a graceful and luxurious ponytail that draped over her shoulders. Peerless beauty. If one had to describe Ayam's appearance, it could only be described with these 4 words. Her appearance might not be the most beautiful in the world, and her figure might not be the best in the world. But that peerless beauty was something no woman could compare to. No, it could be said that they didn't even have the qualifications to compete with her. But even if the woman standing not far away was indeed beautiful, it still couldn't stop Ryudo's body from trembling. Because when he saw the eyes that seemed to be connected to the bottom of the abyss and felt the inhuman temperament on her body, all the beauty on her body would immediately turn into a bone-chilling malice, making people want to commit suicide on the spot so that they wouldn't stay in the same world as this woman. Malice was malice. Deep malice, bottomless malice, malice that made people go crazy. But this didn't mean that Timuayam was a woman full of malice. To be precise, she was the physical existence of the word evil, a flower of evil that bloomed in black blood. Chapter 55. It could be said that the entire Red Album 2, No Survivors, was operated with Timuayam as the core. On the surface, it was a love game, but in fact it was a survival game. The goal was to not be killed by Ayam. Behind the evil, there must be Ayam Sama's shadow. This was the player's evaluation of the witch, and when they called her, they had to add the honorific Sama. There weren't many characters in the game that could make players call them honorifics from the bottom of their hearts. Only a few very charming characters had such an honor. Was Ayam charming? Of course, she was too charming. As the current head of the Tenmu clan, she was the 37th generation direct descendant of Japan's greatest demon king, Oda Nobunaga. At the same time, She was the most terrifying monster in the world. The origin of the monster Iam had to be traced back to nearly 500 years ago during the Warring States period. During that period of war, a tyrant who called himself the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven dragged the entire Japan into the abyss of fear. The Demon King of the Sixth Heaven was the name of the Demon King in religious culture. Nobunaga, as a human, called himself a demon. This kind of situation was quite rare in history. During his lifetime, Oda Nobunaga's atrocities represented by the burning of Mount Hai made the contemporary people hold a strong fear and reverence for him. Under the name of spreading martial arts throughout the world, the army continued to advance, and the people who died under Nobunaga's hands were piled up like a mountain. Thus, he really became a demon king, a true demon king in the truest sense. However, with a burst of shouts, "Advance! The enemy is at Honnouji!" The rebel army raised the banner and surrounded the demon king in Honnouji. In historical records, the demon king of the Sixth Heaven and Honnouji turned into ashes in the flames of the Red Lotus. But history didn't record that the demon king laughed and shouted such a sentence before he died. "Burn, burn. My body may be destroyed, but my bloodline will be passed down for eternity, until this world turns into ashes." Ha 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 ha. Although the demon king died, the black blood was still there. The surviving bloodline took the wealth that Nobunaga collected and fled far away, hiding the family in the darkness of history. 500 years. For nearly 500 years, this clan had been fighting for only one thing: carry on the wishes of the ancestors, turn this world into ashes. However, this was definitely not a great undertaking that could be completed overnight. In order to achieve this goal, every generation of patriarchs would do everything in their power to nurture their successors. Every generation of the clan leader of the Heavenly Eye clan would look for the most outstanding criminals to breed with. The vicious woman who poisoned hundreds of people to death, the serial killer who hid in the alleys, the bloody minister who planned the war. These were all the targets of the Heaven Eye clan. The heavenly demon's black blood needed pitch-black malice to make it thicker, extracting the essence of evil from the outside to give birth to evil heirs, causing the descendants of this family to be further and further away from normal people. During this process, they often used all kinds of drug experiments, surgical modifications, hypnosis, brainwashing, and other methods to ensure that they could stimulate all the potential of the heir. Finally, the former patriarch would place the heirs that he had carefully nurtured in a large house that was built in imitation of Honnouji. He would let them kill each other, leaving only one behind. This kind of feeling was like raising a parasite. Only the parasite king, who could eat his siblings, would be the next patriarch who could make the black blood of the Heavenly Eye clan thicker. This absurd racial transformation had been carried out for as many as 36 generations. After nearly 500 years of racial modification, although Heavenly Eye Iam had the outer shell of a normal person, her inner self was greatly different from a normal person. Ryudo had described her as such before. Dealing with her was like dealing with an alien in human skin. At this moment, standing in this study, Ryudo personally experienced how ridiculous an alien in human skin was. This guy can't be, right? When Heavenly Eye Iam stood in front of him alive, Ryudo's left eye's rogue's analytical lens quickly analyzed the data. However, looking at these numbers really made one's head hurt. After all, this world boss's stats were as follows: name, Heavenly Eye Iam Mage, 26 years old. Stats: Intelligence LV5, Constitution LV4, Courage LV5, Insight LV5, Charm LV5. Was there a bug in this world? How could such a monster be allowed to exist? Seeing Heavenly Eye Iam's stats that were almost maxed out, Ryudo really wanted to travel back in time and not play with her in this world. After all, the stats of LV5 Extreme Superman were extremely overpowered. In the game, it was not that there were no characters whose stats had reached the peak. For example, Cat House Bunnyball should have LV5 Constitution, Tsukigami Yunyin should have LV5 Charm, and the later Kanzaki Color Glaze should have LV5 Intelligence, and so on. However, this group of top talents only had a single stat that was off the charts. The other stats were sparse and normal. This was actually a normal situation. After all, how could there be a top military advisor, an invincible fighter, an extreme boss, a famous detective, and a super idol? Sigh, there really was such a person. She was right in front of him. You fucking. Did you cheat, bastard? From Ryudo's point of view, Ayam's bullshit stats were completely modified by cheating. And to prevent others from saying that she cheated, she purposely didn't max out one of her stats in an attempt to cover up the fact that she cheated. Was that useful? Did you think that you were normal just because you didn't max out all your stats? Normal my ass. If you're not on the ban list tomorrow, I'll jump off the building. How is it? Are you done with your observation? Just as Ryuto was staring at Ayam in a daze, he heard a very special voice coming from the front and entering his ears. Yongji's voice was different from the clear and melodious voice of a woman. Yongji's voice was very deep, making it unforgettable for the rest of one's life. At the same time, it carried a strange magnetism. When he heard her voice, Ryuto quickly came back to his senses and revealed an awkward smile. No, this woman has the insight of a level 5, extreme Superman. If she sees through me, I'll be done for. I'll just fool her for now. In order to cover up his gaffe, Ryuto awkwardly smiled and said, Sorry, when I saw you, I was unconsciously addicted to your beauty, so I was a bit stunned for a moment. Huh. Instantly, Ryuto felt a chill down his spine. Although the latter half of the sentence was what he meant, it didn't come from his mouth. It was Ayam who casually added it. And when she added it, the corner of Ayam's mouth raised in a subtle arc. Her eyes also narrowed, giving people the feeling of a half-smile. Chapter 56. It had to be said that because of Ayam's beauty, when she showed this subtle expression, it was quite beautiful. But in the game, whenever Ayam showed this expression, someone would die. After understanding this, Ryuto asked with trepidation, What do you mean? What do I mean? I'm just stating the words you're going to use to brush me off. Aren't you going to use this as an excuse to cover up the fear when you see me? The smile on Ayam's face grew bigger and bigger. She slowly walked out from behind the table and walked briskly toward Ryuto. Her slender white feet were wearing slender high heels. When the heels hit the carpet, there was no sound, but every step seemed to step on Ryuto's heart. Before Ryuto could react, Ayam moved her head closer and asked with excitement and joy, You're 100% seeing me for the first time. Why do you feel so scared? What did you see just now? Ayam was sure that it was Ryuto's first time seeing her. Even if many people in the underworld knew the name Tenmu Ayam, there were not many people who had actually seen her. At the same time, because of Ayam's strict management, it was impossible for her photos to appear on the internet and the media. But Ryuto obviously knew who she was, and he immediately showed a nervous expression as if he saw a ghost, which made Ayam quite curious. Thus, she walked towards Long Do, increasing the pressure she was exerting on him. For the first time, it was the first time Ryuto was so close to this woman. The two people's faces were almost close together. Ayam's perfect and flawless face was close in front of him. He could even smell her alluring aura of death as long as he breathed. However, the current situation caused Long Do to tremble uncontrollably. LV3 professional expert level of courage was enough for him to remain calm when he was kidnapped by a group of professional mercenaries. However, such psychological endurance was so fragile in front of Ayam. It was so fragile that it was like a cheap condom that could kill people at any time. Beep, 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 beep. Your reply speed is too slow. We are now entering the punishment segment. Crack. Ryuto wanted to reply, but the moment he said a crisp sound came from his left pinky. Ryuto looked down and saw that his little finger, which was originally straighter than a steel bar, had been bent at lightning speed, forming a 90-degree angle with his other 4 fingers. Intense pain. The intense pain of having his finger broken suddenly rushed to his brain, and Long Do almost couldn't help but shout out loud. But he didn't. Ryuto forced himself to endure the pain that was enough to make people faint with a little bit of backbone. He looked up at Ayam, who looked normal. Breaking the finger of a person she just met was as natural as breathing for Ayam. She didn't even look at Ryuto's hand. Then, the beauty smiled and said in a gentle tone, From now on, You only have 5 seconds to answer each of my questions. If you exceed that time, I will break one of your fingers. Do you have any objections? If you do, just say it. I'm very generous. Everything can be discussed. Ayam's eyes seemed to reveal such a message, as if she didn't intend to force others at all. And a stopwatch appeared in her hand, ready to press the timer at any time. After knowing that this woman would never joke, Ryudo immediately replied, No. No objections? Very good. First question. How did you know of my existence? I know from being asked this question by Ayam. Ryudo's brain quickly worked. The time to think was only 5 seconds. If he exceeded that time, he would be tortured. Breaking his finger was not a joke. But how should he answer this question? Ryudo couldn't directly say that he was a transmigrator and that he knew her after playing Red Album 2. No survivors. If he said that, it would be fine if Ayam didn't believe him. If she believed him, she would probably capture him on the spot and cut him up for research. But if he knew of her existence through other means, then what was this means? Shit, it's going to be 5 seconds. I have to answer quickly, otherwise, when he reacted, the stopwatch in Ayam's hand had reached 3 seconds. At the same time, the second snap came from Ryudo's left ring finger. This. Are you kidding me? Didn't we agree on 5 seconds? Ryudo bent down because of the intense pain. He took a deep breath and looked at Ayam, who quietly pressed the stopwatch. At this time, the stopwatch showed exactly 3 seconds. It wasn't even the agreed time. Then why did you break my finger? Under Long Do's silent gaze, Yongji giggled and said, I suddenly felt that 5 seconds was too long, so I changed it to 3 seconds. Don't you think it's a small change that's considerate? When Ayam let out a happy laugh, Ryudo realized that he was wrong. Originally, Ryudo always thought that Ayam was a reckless lunatic, just like in the game. But in reality, the Ayam in the real world was a million times crazier than in the game. She was a universe-level lunatic. Under the stimulation of the intense pain, Ryudo took a few steps back and said as calmly as possible, You don't care how I found out about your existence. You just want to torture me, right? You actually found out. What a smart kid. Clap, clap. Like a mother who saw her child grow up, Ayam smiled and clapped her hands. Her action was very cute. The smile on her face was as kind as the reincarnation of the Holy Mother, but the chaos in her eyes increased. Damn it. Staying with her was like staying with a menopausal psychopathic gorilla with bipolar disorder. If this continues, I will be played to death by her. There's no other way. I can only fight to the death. In this situation, you will die no matter what, so you can only fight to the death. Do you want to take out some kind of weapon from somewhere to deal with me, because you can't win with just your bare hands? Good luck. I'm looking forward to it. As if she saw through Ryudo's inner thoughts, Ayam once again expressed his thoughts with words. She even had a hopeful expression on her face. Are you kidding me, this guy? Bastard. Although Ayam saw through his thoughts again, Ryudo could only take out the pistol hidden in the system inventory and point the black muzzle at the woman. Chapter 57. He didn't know if it was because of Ayam's absolute confidence or for some other reason. Now there were only the two of them in this spacious study room. There was not even a bodyguard, and the door of the study room had already been firmly closed. In other words, now it was a one-on-one contest between Ryudo and Ayam. Ayam's advantage was unquestionable. Her 5 attributes were as strong as an animal. There was absolutely no human in the world who could match her. But Ryudo's side was not absolutely without a chance of winning. After all, he had the unpredictable Krypton fate reversal system. As the young man raised his right hand, a pitch-black pistol appeared in his hand, and the tip of the gun was pointed at Ayam's chest. Yongji didn't have any weapons. Her tight clothes couldn't hide any weapons, unless it was magically conjured like Long Do. Wow, amazing. How did you get the gun? Where did you hide it before? Then, when Ayam was pointed at by the gun, she opened her eyes like a naive child and curiously looked at the weapon that could take her life at any time. Although the gun was pointed at her, Ayam didn't panic at all. It was as if in her eyes, The weapon in Ryudo's hand that could take her life with a pull of the trigger was just a child's toy. Don't move or I will shoot. Okay, I won't move, and then? Under the influence of Ayam's ridicule, Ryudo took a deep breath and walked toward the window while inhaling. If he wanted to escape from here, he definitely couldn't go through the door. There must be mercenaries outside waiting for him. Generally, in this case, the easiest way to escape was to take a hostage. But holding Ayam hostage was no different from seeking death. Only someone with sulfuric acid in their brain would hold her hostage. So now, the only way left for Ryudo was to break the window. As long as he broke the window, he could get out. Although the unfettered sky tower was 666 meters tall, it was surrounded by a vast expanse of blue ocean. If he could jump out of the window, he might have a chance of survival. Of course, Ryudo also knew that jumping into the water from such a high place was not much different from landing on concrete. But even if there was only a 1% chance, he might as well try it. It was better than staying here and being played to death by Ayam. However, Ayam watched Ryudo walk step by step toward the window. She stood there motionlessly with a smile on her face. This strange attitude made Ryudo felt even more uneasy. After cautiously approaching the huge floor-to-ceiling window, Long Do could see the sparkling sea in the distance, shining dazzlingly under the sunlight. There's a problem here. It seems that this window is not so easy to break out. Let's do it. After glancing at Ayam, Ryudo quickly stepped on the floor and his whole body slammed into the window like an arrow leaving the bow. Immediately after, a muffled dong sound came from the study, but it was obviously not the sound of glass breaking. Ha 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 ha. Surrounded by Yongji's demonic laughter, Long Do, whose eyes were full of stars, climbed up from the ground in a sorry state. His face had a very uncomfortable expression. This is the first time I've seen someone use their body to hit a nano-level bulletproof glass that can't even be broken by a rocket launcher. You're really a comedian. Have you watched too many movies? Seeing Ryudo's comical figure bending down and gasping for air, Ayam mercilessly laughed at his stupid actions. Ryudo said without raising his head, I can't help it. Who would have thought that your window is, bang? But just as Ryudo was halfway through his words, 3 sparks suddenly burst out from the bolt of the pistol in his hand. The firing pin quickly hit the bullet and detonated the gunpowder. 3 copper bullets shot out from the muzzle with an explosive wave and shot toward Tenmu Ayam's body. These 3 shots could be said to have been fired very suddenly. At this time, Ryudo bent down and leaned forward, covering his hand, so from Ayam's angle, she couldn't see the shooting at all. And the most important thing was that Ayam was laughing at Ryudo's ugly state just now. When people laugh at others, they generally don't have a brain. Even if Tenmu Ayam was an alien creature in human skin, she would probably follow this rule. Hit, hit, you must hit. The moment he pulled the trigger, Long Do prayed in his heart that this shot would hit its target. Judging from Ayam's attitude when he approached the window, Ryudo knew that there was a high probability that he wouldn't be able to break out of the window. So he quickly changed his strategy and prepared to use this stupid behavior as a cover to feed Ayam a few bullets. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to hit Ayam with such a small pistol. After all, this guy was a monster with extremely strong physical fitness and god-level insight. Dodging a few bullets was just child's play. If he wanted to hit her, he had to catch her off guard. Even if her physical fitness was strong, as long as a bullet hit her, she would definitely. The next second, Ryudo quickly raised his head and wanted to see where his bullet hit Ayam. But the truly terrifying thing happened. Under Ryudo's dumbfounded gaze, the woman still stood in the same place without moving. The smile on her face became even brighter, and there was no sign of being hit by the bullet. How is this possible? Although I aimed at her feet, it's impossible for 3 consecutive shots to not hit the same spot. Seeing Ryudo's incredulous expression, Ayam smiled and pointed at the carpet under her feet. Carpet? Why is she pointing? Hiss. No way. Ryudo looked at where the finger was pointing. He saw that in front of the carpet under the high heels, 3 shiny bullets actually fell to the ground. No, they didn't fall. They were absorbed. The heads of the 3 copper bullets seemed to be attracted by some kind of force as they were tightly stuck to the ground, and the tails even tilted up a little. Sorry, there is a special bullet absorption device on the floor of this room. Bullets made of copper, lead, steel, and other materials will be absorbed when they are shot out more than 1 meter. After explaining the strange situation, Ayam smiled and clapped her hands again. Kacha! Kacha! The next moment, hundreds of guns suddenly appeared from the ceiling of the study room. All kinds of muzzles of different shapes were all pointed at Ryudo's surroundings. And if you really want to threaten people, how can a small pistol be enough? You have to at least go this far, right? Yongji controlled hundreds of guns and pointed them at Long Do. She winked at him in a friendly manner, as if to tell Long Do to continue with his performance. She wanted to see what other tricks he had up his sleeve. Chapter 58. Ryudo had never imagined that there would be a day when he would be pointed at by so many guns at the same time. Pistols, rifles, double-barreled shotguns, submachine guns, light and heavy machine guns, carbines, sniper rifles, grenade launchers, and even a flintlock. F***ck your mother. Are you holding an arms expo here, you bastard? Others are calling out the dishes, but you are calling out the guns? At this very moment, the hundreds of guns pointed at Ryudo were all different. Many of them were even ancient models that were already in museums. From ancient times to modern times, there were even futuristic sci-fi weapons. These were the guns that Tenmu Ayam used to threaten others. They were also the products of evil that represented the entire evil history of mankind. The Tenmu group was a merchant of death that sold weapons. Weapons were specialized tools for killing, and also a symbol of the evil intentions of mankind. Naturally, Ayam was very familiar with the evil intentions of mankind. She was very fond of them. Of course, it was hard to say whether she liked the guns themselves or the feeling of pointing them at someone's nose. Just as Ryudo was feeling numb from the different guns, Ayam smiled and reminded him, "By the way, these guns are loaded with specially made reinforced glass bullets. You don't have to worry about the bullets not being able to be fired. It'll be fun to shoot." The floor of the room was indeed equipped with a device that could absorb all metal bullets, but the weapons on the ceiling were all made of reinforced glass bullets. It was perfect. The layout of the study could be said to perfectly demonstrate the vile character of Tenmu Ayam. Only I'm allowed to beat you up, not you. Heh, this is how willful this old lady is. If not for the fact that Ryudo was unable to retaliate, he really wanted to pick up the bullets on the floor and stuff them into Ayam's nostrils or any other orifice. It's over. I didn't expect her study to be so overboard. It seems that it's impossible to win against her here. Originally, when Ryudo was caught in the unrestrained Sky Pagoda, he thought about whether he could have a battle of wits with Ayam and try to get rid of this great demon. Now that he thought about it, his naive thinking was like eating peaches. If Tenmu Ayam could be dealt with so easily, the Kaneshiro clan, which held the most authority, would have already turned her into ashes. How could they have allowed her to run amok for so long? Therefore, no matter what, Ryudo was doomed today. Both he and Ayam knew this very well. All right, how should I play with you next? But I'm not a demon. If you're willing to kneel down and kowtow to me, I might spare your life. Seeing Ryudo slowly lowering his head, Ayam became even more excited. She started to pant. What she loved the most was the expression of despair that humans would naturally reveal when faced with a hopeless situation, especially when she saw those unlucky bastards kneeling on the ground and kowtowing with snot and tears. Every time she saw them, she was so excited that she almost spat out water. Everyone knew that Ryudo was doomed today, so he would definitely kneel on the ground and kowtow like everyone else, trying to beg for a chance to live. However, when Ryudo raised his head, what appeared in Ayam's eyes was not a face filled with despair. Although his face was filled with unwillingness and anger, there was not a trace of fear, let alone despair. At this time, Ryudo's fear had decreased to the lowest point, because he had thought through many things. The next moment, he shook his head and said in a tone that sounded like he was talking to trash, "Tenmu Ayam, I've seen many scum and bastards, but among this group of unrecyclable trash, you are without a doubt the one who deserves to die the most." What? This kid is scolding me? After being scolded like this, Ayam was stunned. It wasn't as if she hadn't seen people who gave up when they were forced to the brink of death. In the end, they died because they were addicted to talking. It wasn't as if she hadn't seen people before. But Ryudo obviously didn't look like he gave up. Instead, he seemed to have made up his mind, and he was more confident than before. And then, this strange change made Ayam couldn't help but retract the smile on her face, and even showed a faintly unhappy expression. Then I swear here, if I don't throw you into the Tokyo Bay to feed the fish, I, Ryudo Kiryu, will write the 4 words upside down. Oh, okay. Fighting Dragon Shangtong. Bang. With a loud bang, a specially strengthened glass bullet hit Ryudo's left knee. The strong impact made his left knee explode on the spot, and blood spilled all over the ground. He could barely hold the pistol and fell to the ground. When she saw Ryudo's painful expression, Ayam sneered, "So, Mr. Fighting Dragon Shangtong, how do you plan to throw me into the Tokyo Bay to feed the fish in this situation? I'm really curious, and I want to see it." Is it? Ha ha ha. You will see it, in the not-too-distant future. The severe pain hit Ryudo's nerves, and there was no hope of victory in this dangerous situation. But in this case, Ryudo Kiryu laughed. His laughter showed a sense of heroism, and there was a sense of heroism that said, "I'm not afraid of death. I'm going to keep my innocence in the world." Crazy? Is this guy crazy? For the first time in her life, Ayam seemed to see a madman who was crazier than herself. Under her puzzled gaze, Ryudo slowly raised the gun. Although it couldn't be compared with the hundreds of guns that extended from the ceiling, this small pistol was also a weapon that could kill. However, Ayam sighed helplessly and smiled. Is there something wrong with your brain? Didn't I say that this thing can't even touch me? It can't touch you, but it can touch me. Ha 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 ha. Before Ayam could react, Ryudo didn't hesitate to laugh, put the gun against his temple, and pulled the trigger. To be honest, this move was really beyond Ayam's expectation. What's going on? You said you would throw me into the Tokyo Bay to feed the fish, and you took out a gun to commit suicide? This is not right, right? How can you say one thing and do another? Just when Ryudo finally fell to the ground with a hole in his head, the expression on Ayam's face was unprecedentedly confused. From Ryudo's expression and attitude just now, he was not the kind of person who would give up survival, let alone commit suicide. But did he really give up? In Ayam's world, yes, but in Ryudo's world, this was not the case. Tenmuetsuheim, just you wait, we will meet again. But it won't be under this kind of situation. Before his consciousness finally disappeared, Ryudo took a deep look at the beautiful face, as if he wanted to engrave this face into the depths of his soul. Detected that the host is on the verge of death, initiating emergency rescue plan by spending 1 million to erase the fact of death. Beep, 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 erase successful. In the next moment, the surroundings of the dragon battle underwent a drastic change. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.